Hello everyone, I'm the Creeps Cabin. I know you use these videos to fall asleep. So before that, like the video and subscribe to the channel. Also, where are you from and what time are you watching? Now get comfortable and relax. About 5 years ago, my life was in a place that felt settled but not calm. I was working a steady job, seeing my then girlfriend, who is now my wife, and we spent most weekends together either at my apartment or hers. Life felt routine in a way I had craved for years. Around that same time, my mom started dating again. She had been single for a while after her divorce, and even though I wanted her to be happy, part of me felt uneasy about her re-entering that world. I didn't like the idea of strangers being close to her, sitting in the chair I grew up seeing her in, sharing meals with her at the table that still had scratches from my childhood homework sessions. I knew that was selfish, but it was how I felt. She told me she met a man online. She said he was quiet and polite, someone who listened well and didn't push her to open up too quickly. She liked that about him. I didn't think too much of it when she told me. I just said I was happy she was happy. The first time I met him was when my wife and I went to visit her one Sunday. He was sitting on the couch with his eyes closed. He opened them briefly when we walked in, nodded a hello, then closed them again. I thought he was sleeping, but later he just got up and went to the bathroom with his eyes still half closed, like he was meditating or thinking deeply. My wife found it unsettling. She whispered to me later that night that there was something about him that felt off, like he wasn't fully there or wasn't fully human. I told her not to say things like that it was cruel, but secretly I agreed. Something about him felt not right. He wasn't mean. He never raised his voice. He never criticized anyone. But there were these little things, like how he ate chocolate. One time he offered my wife a piece of chocolate from a small plastic bag he kept in his pocket. She said no, politely, but he took a piece out anyway, unwrapped it, and put it in his mouth so slowly it felt deliberate. Then he closed his eyes completely and let out a long sighing moan, almost silent, but enough to hear if you were close. He stood there with his eyes closed, unmoving, while it melted. My wife turned away. She didn't say anything. I felt uncomfortable watching him and left the room to pretend to check something on my phone. Things like that happened a lot. He would eat grapes one by one with his eyes closed. He would stand in the backyard with his eyes closed for nearly an hour, facing the fence. My mom said he was meditating, that it helped him with his anxiety. I said nothing. One time we visited, and my mom got called into work unexpectedly. It was a Saturday. She worked at the small local library and sometimes had to fill in when staff called out. She told us to make ourselves at home, that she'd only be gone a few hours. Her boyfriend was there too. As soon as she left, he went into her bedroom and closed the door. My wife and I sat on the couch watching TV, but neither of us could focus. The house was silent. We heard him moving in the bedroom once or twice, the soft thud of footsteps on carpet, then nothing. For hours he stayed in there. He never came out. I thought about knocking to check on him, but I didn't want to. I didn't want him to come out. I felt safer with him in there, behind a closed door. When Christmas rolled around that year, things between them had gotten tense. My mom started telling us little things. He never wanted to go anywhere with her, only stayed at her house. He would stand outside in the cold for hours with his eyes closed. He would wake up in the middle of the night and just sit on the edge of the bed with his eyes closed until morning. She said she felt like he wasn't really with her, like his mind was always somewhere else. We told her she deserved better, that she didn't need to be with someone who made her feel alone. She agreed. She said she would break up with him soon. I didn't think she'd do it on Christmas Eve, but that's what she did. We were visiting her for Christmas, and she told us in the evening that she'd asked him to come over, and when he arrived she told him calmly that it wasn't working. She said he didn't say anything. He just sat there with his eyes closed for a long time, and then stood up and left. She felt relieved, she said. That night we stayed over at her place, so we could get up early and go visit my dad on Christmas morning. It was a plan we'd made weeks before. We packed our bags into the car and left just after sunrise. The roads were clear at first, but as we got closer to my dad's house, the snow began to fall. By mid-morning the storm was heavy. We didn't plan to stay overnight, but the snow didn't stop. It kept falling, hour after hour, until the roads were closed and we had no choice. My dad's house was warm and bright, filled with food and the smell of pine candles and leftover turkey. We slept in the guest room that night. listening to the wind battering the windows. By morning, the snowplows had cleared enough for us to leave. My wife was quiet during breakfast, pushing her food around her plate. When we got into the car, she turned to me and said she wanted to check on my mom. She said she had a bad feeling about her ex-boyfriend. I didn't argue. I felt the same deep down, even though I didn't say it. The drive back was slow but manageable. As we turned onto my mom's street, I felt a tightness in my chest. Her car was in the driveway. That didn't mean much. She lived close enough to walk to work, and it hadn't snowed as badly in her town. I parked behind her car, and we sat there for a minute, staring at the house. The curtains were open, but we couldn't see inside from the angle of the car. My wife said we should go in. I told her okay. My mom never locked her door. It drove me crazy. I always told her to lock it. Anyone could just walk in. We pushed the door open and stepped inside. The house was silent. Too silent. I remember feeling a sudden drop in my stomach like I was falling. My wife grabbed my arm. Her fingernails dug into my skin. She was staring at something in the kitchen. I followed her gaze, and that's when I saw it. Blood. Deep red blood oozing out of the refrigerator's water dispenser. The spill tray was overflowing with it, dripping onto the linoleum floor, making a small puddle that was slowly spreading. For a split second, my brain refused to believe what I was seeing. Then reality slammed into me all at once. I thought he'd come back. I thought he'd killed her. I thought her head was in the freezer. I couldn't move. My wife was shaking. I could feel her trembling through my arm. My knees felt weak. I took a step forward, feeling like I was underwater. I walked to the fridge and reached out with a hand that felt numb. I pulled open the freezer door, expecting the worst thing I could ever imagine. Inside the freezer was a bag of frozen cherries. The bag had split open along the side seam. Someone, probably my mom, had shoved it onto the ice maker shelf without sealing it properly. The cherries had partially thawed and were frozen into a dark red clump. Melted cherry juice had leaked down into the ice chute, staining everything crimson. The juice had dripped through the ice dispenser, collecting in the tray and overflowing onto the floor. I stood there staring at it, trying to catch my breath. My chest felt tight, my heart hammering against my ribs like it wanted to escape. I felt dizzy with relief and leftover fear. My wife let out a long, shaky breath behind me. We cleaned it up together. We pulled out the ice tray and threw away the ruined cherries. We wiped down the inside of the freezer and the ice chute and the dispenser. The stain was thick and sticky, clinging to everything it touched. We washed the spilled tray in the sink and mopped up the puddle on the floor. My hands were shaking so badly, I dropped the tray twice. The cherry juice smelled faintly sweet, almost sickening after the adrenaline of fear. When we finished, we sat down at the kitchen table. My mom wasn't home. She'd gone to work early that morning, leaving before we arrived. I called her and she picked up right away, cheerful, asking if we were coming by for lunch. My wife and I sat there, the smell of cherries still lingering in the air, the quiet house pressing in around us, and I realized just how close fear and relief sit beside each other. My mom came home an hour later, smiling and hugging us both, apologizing for the mess with the cherries, saying she was in a hurry that morning and forgot. She had no idea what we'd thought. I didn't tell her. Some things are better left unspoken. But that day stayed with me. The feeling of seeing blood when your brain is telling you it's blood, your eyes are telling you it's blood, your body is already grieving before you even know the truth. The feeling of expecting to find death behind a thin sheet of plastic and metal. The feeling of looking into a freezer and realizing your worst fear is only fruit. After that, my mom changed her locks. She never spoke to him again. My wife and I never mentioned it to anyone. It felt like a dream, like something that didn't belong in the daylight world. Even now, when I eat cherries, I think of that day. I think of how easily fear can live inside us, waiting for the right moment to bloom, and how quickly relief can come, washing it all away, leaving only a quiet house, a clean floor, and the sweet lingering smell of fruit. I never really paid much attention to the old house next to mine. It had been empty for as long as I could remember, even before my parents bought our place. Over the years, the grass grew up to my waist, trees leaned over its sagging roof, and ivy crept around the porch columns, pulling them apart a little more each year. My dad once told me the man who owned it moved out to California 25 years ago and just never sold it. I always thought that was strange. Why leave a whole house behind? Didn't he need the money? When I was a kid, I used to ride my bike down the street and avoid looking at that place, convinced there was something wrong with it. But as I got older, I stopped caring. It was just another empty, rotting house like you see in small towns all over. I'd walk past it every morning on my way to school, every evening coming home from work. Nothing about it caught my interest until last winter. It was a Saturday, about an hour before sunset. I was sitting in my living room, looking out the window at the yard, when I noticed how the light was hitting the house next door. All the windows were dark except one upstairs. The glass was streaked with dirt and fog from age, but I could see the faintest reflection of the sun, making it glow pale orange. For the first time, I wondered what was left inside. Did the man take everything with him? Did he leave furniture behind? Old photos? Money stuffed under the floorboards? My curiosity started chewing at me until I couldn't ignore it anymore. The next morning, I grabbed my flashlight and gloves and went around the side of the house. There was an old window leading to the basement, half buried under weeds and fallen leaves. I pulled away the dead plants, scraped off some dirt with my shoe, and pressed my hand against the glass. It rattled in the frame. I put my gloved fingers under the edge, pushed upwards, and after a few tries, it slid open with a screech that made me wince. The smell hit me right away, damp wood mold dust, and something sour like rotting cardboard. I swung my legs over and dropped down into the darkness, landing on cold concrete. I stood still for a second, letting my eyes adjust. The basement was bigger than I thought it would be. My flashlight beam swept over the walls, all covered in peeling paint and cobwebs. Pipes snaked along the ceiling beams, dripping rust-stained water onto the ground. In the corner, half covered by an old canvas drop cloth, was a grand piano. My heart skipped a beat. Who the hell leaves a piano behind? I walked over to it, lifted the cover off the keys, and pressed one. The note came out warped and sad, vibrating through the basement like a dying animal. I pressed a few more, slow and careful, each one more out of tune than the last. I started looking around, sweeping my light over shelves stacked with dusty boxes. Some had old labels like Zmaz 1978 or Attic Junk. I saw a helmet sitting on top of one box. I picked it up and realized it was an old WW2 steel pot helmet, still with the chin strap attached, though the leather was cracking and stiff. Underneath it was a gas mask, lenses clouded with age, rubber stiff and curled inward. There were medals in a wooden case, little colored ribbons, and tarnished pins I didn't recognize. It felt wrong to touch them, like I was stealing from someone's memory. Next to the boxes, propped against the wall, was a poster in a thin wooden frame. I leaned closer, and my chest tightened. It was a poster of Elvis Presley, young and smiling in that way he did back then. In the bottom corner was a black marker signature. I couldn't tell if it was real, but it looked like it. My flashlight flickered, and I smacked it against my leg, sending a beam of yellow light across the basement again. Instruments were scattered everywhere. An old acoustic guitar with a broken neck, a trumpet with dents along its bell, a violin missing strings. Sheet music lay across the floor, warped by water damage. There was a broken picture frame on top of one box, the glass cracked into a spiderweb. Inside was a wedding photo. The woman's white dress was stained yellow with age. The man next to her in a black suit, smiling wide, hair slicked back. His arm was around her waist like he couldn't believe he was allowed to touch her. I felt a tight ache in my chest looking at them. I wondered where they were now. Did they stay married? Did she die before he left? The basement felt heavy with their stories. I spent almost an hour down there, looking through boxes of old letters and postcards, finding a record player with cracked vinyl records stacked nearby. Eventually, my knees started to hurt from crouching, so I decided to check out the rest of the house. I found the basement door and pushed it open, stepping into the kitchen. The air was cold and sharp with mildew. The fridge door was cracked open, and the smell coming from it was so strong I almost gagged. Inside were old Tupperware containers filled with black, molded sludge. There was a pot on the stove with something solidified and fuzzy inside. Half-empty beer bottles stood on the counter. The liquid inside turned cloudy and chunky. A pile of unopened mail sat by the sink, yellowed and curling at the edges. Above the sink was a window, covered in grime, looking out onto the side yard where weeds had swallowed an old lawn chair and rusted barbecue. I walked into the living room. The couch was covered in dust and stained with dark patches I didn't want to think about. An ashtray overflowing with cigarette, but sat on the coffee table. Magazines were scattered across the floor, their pages wrinkled and stuck together from water damage. In the corner, a lamp still burned, its yellow bulb dim but alive, as if someone had just left it on yesterday. I flipped the switch next to the door, and the overhead light flickered to life, buzzing softly. I don't know why, but that scared me more than anything so far. How was the power still on after all these years? I walked down the hallway and found a bedroom. The bed was unmade, blankets twisted and half on the floor. A dresser stood open, clothes still folded inside. There were boots next to the closet, dusty but lined up neatly like the owner was coming back for them any minute. On the nightstand was an alarm clock blinking 12 o'clock over and over. There was a half-empty glass of water next to it, the bottom layered with green algae. I turned and looked at the staircase leading upstairs. The wooden steps were covered in dust, footprints visible from whoever had last gone up. I hesitated for a moment, my skin crawling with unease, but my curiosity was stronger. I started walking up, each step creaking under my weight. The hallway upstairs was narrow and dark. I could see the door to the bathroom half open, the mirror cracked straight down the middle. The smell up here was different, stronger, like rotten wood mixed with something sour and metallic. I walked past the bathroom towards a room at the end of the hall. As I reached for the doorknob, I heard it, a soft crying coming from the room on my left. I froze, every hair on my body standing straight up. The crying was quiet, muffled, like someone trying not to be heard. It didn't sound like an animal. It didn't sound like an old pipe groaning in the cold. It sounded like a person. I turned my flashlight towards the door. The sound stopped. I stood there, not breathing, listening so hard my ears hurt. Then it started again, quieter this time. My mind was racing, trying to make sense of it. No one lived here. The place had been empty for decades. Was there a homeless person hiding out? Some runaway kid? Someone dying up here without anyone knowing? My chest tightened at the thought. I pressed my hand against the door and slowly pushed it open. The room was empty. Completely empty. No furniture, no boxes, nothing. The carpet was covered in stains and rat droppings. The crying had stopped again. I stepped inside, shining my flashlight into every corner, checking behind the door, in the closet, under the window. There was no one there. Just as I started to turn around, I heard the crying again. This time it was right behind me. I spun around so fast I almost fell. My flashlight beam swung across the empty room, the peeling wallpaper, the cracked ceiling. I stood there, shaking, waiting for something to move, for someone to step out of the shadows. But nothing happened. The crying stopped. All I could hear was my own breathing, ragged and panicked. I backed out of the room, keeping my light facing forward, down the hallway, down the stairs, through the living room and kitchen. I didn't stop until I was back in the basement, climbing out the window into the cold afternoon air. I scrambled out, fell onto the grass, and laid there for a moment, staring up at the sky, my heart pounding so hard it felt like it was trying to escape my chest. I never went back inside that house. Over the next few days, I tried to convince myself it was just old pipes making noises, or a raccoon trapped somewhere in the walls. But deep down, I knew what I heard. It wasn't an animal. It wasn't pipes. It was a person crying, and they were standing right behind me in an empty room. A week later, I called the county to report the place as a safety hazard. They came out and boarded up the windows, posted bright orange condemnation notices on the front door. Now when I walk past it, I don't look at it anymore. I keep my eyes straight ahead and my pace quick. Sometimes late at night, I lie in bed and stare at the ceiling, thinking about everything I saw down there. The wedding photo, the instruments, the beer bottles still lined up on the counter. And I think about that crying sound in the empty room. I wonder who it belonged to, or what they were crying for. I wonder if they ever left, or if they're still there, standing behind that door, waiting for someone else to come in and listen. I don't think about it for long. I force myself to roll over, close my eyes, and tell myself it doesn't matter. Because I'm never going back inside that house again. And that's the end of it. Or at least, that's what I tell myself. When I was 10 years old, I moved to my dad's place after my parents separated. It was a quiet neighborhood, a small town really, and I didn't know anyone there. My dad worked long hours, leaving early in the morning and coming home when it was already dark outside. The only people I really knew back then were the family my dad was friends with. He talked about them a lot before I moved in. There was a single mom who worked 2 jobs, and she had 3 kids. At first I was nervous meeting them. I didn't really talk much to anyone those first months, but eventually I got to know the kids a bit. There was an older boy who mostly stayed in his room, a girl who was 2 years older than me, and a younger brother who was probably 8 or 9 back then. I remember the girl the most. Her name was Stephanie. She was 12 when I met her and 14 when everything happened. We weren't exactly close, not in a best friends type of way. She had her own friends and I had mine, though our friend groups often mixed because it was a small place. There weren't many kids around, so everyone just sort of grouped together. I always thought she was really confident, the type of person who laughed loud at things I didn't even find funny, who wore bright colors to school when everyone else was wearing gray or black hoodies. She walked everywhere. She'd take her brother to the store down the road, or walk to the small park in town to hang out with friends. I'd see her walking past my dad's place sometimes, waving, her little brother trailing behind with a plastic sword or a stick in his hand. The winter when it happened was cold, really cold. The type of cold that made the skin on your knuckles crack open until it bled. I remember that year because my dad's old truck wouldn't start some mornings, and he'd have to take the neighbor's van to work. The roads were always icy, the kind of icy that made you walk like a penguin down the driveway, so you didn't fall and crack your tailbone. That was also the winter I really started making friends in the neighborhood. One of those friends was Rob. He lived just down the road from Stephanie's house. He was a year older than me and spent most of his time playing outside or riding his bike, even when it was freezing. Rob knew Stephanie better than I did. They hung out more often, though I never thought much about it. She was older than both of us, so it was always cool when she'd let us hang around. It was a week before Christmas when it happened. I remember because my dad had finally put up the Christmas tree in the living room. We didn't have many ornaments, just a few red and gold plastic balls and some silver tinsel. There were only 2 presents under the tree, both from my mom, who mailed them from her place. I spent a lot of evenings sitting on the couch looking at that tree, feeling weird about how empty the house still felt even with all the twinkling lights. That night, my dad was working late again. I was sitting in the living room watching TV when my phone buzzed. It was Rob, telling me he was hanging out at Stephanie's house. I didn't go. I was too tired from school, and it was already dark out, the type of dark where the street lamps flickered orange and made everything look even creepier outside. I didn't know it at the time, but Stephanie and her little brother were home alone. Their mom worked the late shift at a care home just outside of town. I guess it was normal for them to be home alone. She was old enough to watch her brother, and it was never really an issue before. Their mom always came home around midnight, and the kids would already be in bed. That night, Rob went over just to hang out. I think they were just watching TV or listening to music in the living room. He didn't plan on staying long. That was what he told me later, when I finally saw him after everything happened. The part that makes this whole thing even worse is how normal it was right up until it wasn't. There was a knock on the door, and Stephanie thought it was her mom. I guess her mom always knocked a certain way before coming in, and whoever was at the door must have knocked just like that. Rob told me later he felt weird about it right away. He wasn't supposed to be there. Stephanie's mom didn't really like when she had friends over when she wasn't home, and definitely not boys. So when he heard the knock, he just panicked. He ran to the window, opened it, and climbed out. Their house was only a couple feet off the ground, so it wasn't hard. He ran straight home and didn't think about it again until later that night. It wasn't her mom. That's the part that makes my chest feel tight even now, all these years later. The woman at the door was someone Stephanie's mom had talked about before to her co-workers. Her mom worked at the care home, helping older people and people who couldn't live on their own. There was a lady there who had a sister in a mental institution. The sister had been let out recently. Somehow, through talking, she found out where Stephanie's family lived. She knew their mom's working schedule. She knew the kids would be home alone. I don't know exactly what happened after she got into the house. No one really does, except the little brother, and he never talked about it after. All I know is that she came in and did something so horrible that even thinking about it makes me feel like I'm going to throw up. Somehow, Stephanie's little brother got away. He ran to the neighbors barefoot in the snow to call the police. I don't know if he saw everything, or if he just saw enough to know he had to run. The police came. Ambulances came too, but there was nothing they could do. She was gone by the time anyone arrived. I heard later that the woman decapitated her. I didn't understand what that meant at first. I remember sitting on my bed with my dad standing in the doorway, telling me what had happened. I didn't cry right away because I didn't really get it. I didn't understand what decapitated meant. I asked him. He told me it meant she cut her head off. I still didn't cry, not then. It was like my body froze up and couldn't move. I just sat there staring at the floor, at a small stain on the carpet where I had spilled juice the week before. I remember thinking about how mad my dad was when I spilled it, and wondering if Stephanie's mom would be mad about blood on the carpet. My brain didn't know what to think. It was too big to understand. I heard later from other kids at school that when the police came in, they found Stephanie's body naked in the bathtub. Her head was missing. The woman hid it somewhere in the house. The cops had to search through everything, even the wrapped Christmas presents under the tree. That part stuck with me the most. The idea that her head might have been in a box meant for Christmas, that the people who found it had to see it like that. I don't know where they found it in the end, but they did. The woman was arrested, of course. She didn't even try to hide what she did. I think she was too far gone in her mind to understand what she had done. I wasn't allowed to go to Stephanie's funeral. My dad said it would be too much for me, that funerals were hard enough without something like that hanging over them. I didn't argue. I didn't want to go anyway. I didn't want to see everyone crying. I didn't want to sit there and picture what had happened to her, how scared she must have been, how painful it must have been. I spent the day of her funeral sitting on the couch staring at our little Christmas tree. The 2 presents from my mom still sat under it, wrapped in shiny red paper. I didn't touch them. I didn't feel like it was okay to open them. It felt wrong to celebrate anything after what happened. Afterwards, the house where it happened stayed empty for a long time. No one wanted to buy it. I'd walk past it on my way to the store sometimes. The blinds were always closed, and there were dead leaves piled up against the front steps. Sometimes I thought I saw someone looking out the window, but I knew it was just my mind playing tricks on me. Rob changed after that. He didn't hang out as much. He stayed home more, stopped talking to a lot of people. I think he blamed himself for leaving that night. I don't think it would have changed anything even if he had stayed, but I know that kind of logic doesn't really work when you're carrying guilt like that. That winter felt like it lasted forever. Even after the snow melted, everything felt cold. School felt different. No one talked about what happened directly, but everyone felt it. There was an empty desk in one of the classes that no one sat in. Teachers stopped mentioning her name. Kids who used to hang out with her stopped laughing as loud as they used to. Everyone moved a little slower, a little quieter. Even when Christmas finally came, it felt wrong to celebrate it. I opened my mom's presents on Christmas morning while my dad drank his coffee in silence. He didn't even bother making pancakes like he usually did. We just sat there in the living room with the TV playing Christmas movies in the background. I don't even remember what my mom got me that year. Years later, after I moved out of my dad's house and started working, I drove through that neighborhood again. The house was still there, but someone else was living in it. They painted it a different color, changed the curtains, put potted plants on the porch. But I still felt sick looking at it. I didn't stop. I just kept driving, thinking about Stephanie and how I never really got to know her. I always thought we'd have more time to become better friends. But that's the thing about time. You never really know how much you have until it's gone. I think about her every Christmas, about the snow that winter, and how the air felt sharp enough to cut your skin. I think about her brother, about Rob, about how something like that never really leaves you, no matter how many years pass. It's been so long now, but every winter when the sky turns that particular pale gray and the trees are bare, I think about her walking down the street in her bright jackets, her brother chasing her with a stick, and the way she'd wave at me when I watched from my window. It's not something I talk about. It's not something I tell people when they ask about scary things that have happened to me. Because it wasn't just scary. It was real. It was death and blood and grief, and it changed the way I saw the world forever. Some things are too heavy to share out loud. Some things are meant to stay quiet, buried deep, just like her memory buried itself in my chest, where it still lives, cold and sharp like that winter air. I remember that day so clearly, like it's burned into my mind. It started off like any normal workday. I woke up around 6, just before my alarm, and lay there listening to the sound of the ceiling fan turning in slow circles. My wife was asleep next to me. She worked nights at the hospital, so mornings were when she usually crashed into a deep sleep, her breathing slow and even. I slipped out of bed quietly, trying not to wake her. I remember I stood in the bathroom brushing my teeth, staring at my own tired face in the mirror, thinking about the long day ahead. I had back-to-back meetings at work and a report I needed to finish by lunch. I didn't think about anything else that morning, just work, bills, and the usual grind. I kissed her forehead before I left. She didn't even stir. The drive to work was quiet. The highway wasn't too crowded that early, and I remember how the sun was just coming up, turning everything a kind of dusty orange. I got to work, parked in my usual spot under the big oak tree, and went inside. The building always smelled like burnt coffee in the mornings, and the air conditioning was turned up too high. I remember shivering as I walked to my cubicle. I sat down, turned on my computer, and got lost in emails. It was around 10:30 when my phone rang. I looked at the screen and saw it was my wife. That was strange. She never called me during the day. I felt a little jolt in my chest. I picked up the phone and just heard her voice sounding groggy and unsettled. She told me to call my friend Danny. She didn't say why at first, just that I needed to call him and check in. I asked her what was going on, and she paused for a while before saying she'd had a dream, but she couldn't remember it. She just felt like I needed to call Danny. I felt confused, but also a little uneasy. She wasn't the type to say things like that for no reason. She sounded worried. Even though dreams never meant anything to me, her tone was enough to push me into action. I hung up and stared at the cubicle wall for a minute, thinking about it. Then I picked up my phone again and scrolled to Danny's number. I'd known Danny for years. We met in college, both young and stupid back then, drinking cheap beer in plastic cups and talking about the future like we had any clue. Now he lived a few towns over with his wife and 2 kids. We didn't talk every day, but we stayed in touch, checking in every couple of weeks. I called him. When he answered, his voice was cheerful. I told him about my wife's call, feeling awkward because it sounded silly to say out loud that she had a dream and wanted me to check on him. But he took it lightly, chuckled a bit, and told me everything was fine. I felt a bit embarrassed for calling him with no real reason, but he seemed to appreciate it in a way, like he knew it was coming from a place of care. He said his family was good, and he was just about to leave for work. I told him to take care, and we hung up. I called my wife back to tell her. She was quiet on the other end when I said Danny and his family were fine. I could tell she didn't believe it, but she didn't say much more. She just told me okay, and that was it. I went back to work, trying to focus on my report, but I kept thinking about her call. The feeling stuck with me all day like a stone in my shoe. I kept checking my phone every hour, half expecting another call from her, half expecting some news from Danny. It was later that evening when I found out. I had gotten home, changed out of my work clothes, and was sitting at the kitchen table with her while she ate her breakfast before leaving for her night shift. I was scrolling through social media absent-mindedly when my phone buzzed with a message from Danny. All it said was "call me when you can." I felt my stomach tighten. I called him right away, walking out onto the back porch so my wife couldn't hear. His voice was different this time. It was flat, hollow, like there was no life behind it. He told me that about half an hour after I called him, he got a call from his uncle in Florida. His son, who had been living down there for a year with his mother, had hanged himself. He was only 17. I remember standing there on the porch, staring out at the yard. The grass was long because I hadn't had time to cut it in weeks. The sun was setting, turning the sky pink and gray, and there were a few birds sitting on the fence. I just stood there listening to him breathe on the other end of the line, not knowing what to say. I didn't say anything. I just let him sit there in silence with me, because I didn't know what words could possibly help. After a while, he said he had to go. He sounded like he was about to cry, but he hung up before he did. I walked back inside, and my wife was sitting at the table sipping her coffee. She looked up at me, and I guess she could tell something was wrong. I told her what happened. She didn't say anything. She just stared down at the table, her eyes glazed over like she was somewhere else. I could see the goosebumps rising on her arms. Then she just got up, put her mug in the sink, and went to the bedroom to get dressed for work. I sat there for a while, staring at the empty chair where she had been sitting, listening to the quiet hum of the refrigerator and the ticking of the clock on the wall. After she left for work, I went and sat on the porch again. The sun had gone down completely by then, and the air was getting cooler. I sat there for a long time, thinking about Danny, thinking about his son, thinking about the dream my wife had. I I thought about how she didn't even remember the dream itself, only that it made her think of Danny. I wondered what it felt like to wake up from a dream like that, with a weight on your chest so heavy it forced you to act. I wondered if I would have called Danny if she hadn't told me to. Probably not. He would have found out anyway, but I still think about it, about how thin the threads are that hold us to each other, how something as small as a dream can carry the feeling of death in it before it arrives. That night I couldn't sleep. I kept seeing Danny's face in my mind, the way his voice sounded on the phone. I kept thinking about his son, about what it must feel like to get that call, to hear those words. I thought about the times Danny had told me about his boy, about his grades, about the football games he went to. I remembered one day years ago when we were all at the park for a barbecue, and his son was still a kid, running around with ketchup on his face and grass stains on his jeans. He had been laughing so hard that day, chasing after a red frisbee that kept landing in the dirt. I didn't tell anyone else about the dream, about the phone call, or about what happened after. It felt like something I had to keep to myself. My wife never brought it up again either. It was like it just vanished from her mind, like the dream itself. But I still think about it. Even now, all these years later, I think about it when I wake up in the middle of the night and the world feels silent and heavy. I think about Danny. I think about his son. I think about how my wife woke up that day with a dream she couldn't remember and a feeling she couldn't shake, and how the world kept turning anyway. Sometimes I wonder about all the other dreams we forget. The ones that vanish the second we open our eyes, slipping away before we even know they were there. I wonder what they carry. I wonder if they're just nonsense, broken fragments of our thoughts, or if they're warnings we just don't hear. I wonder if it would have changed anything if she had remembered it clearly, if I had called Danny sooner. Probably not. But I still wonder. That day taught me something I didn't want to learn, that sometimes there is no reason, no explanation, just a heavy feeling that sinks into your bones and stays there forever. I still see Danny every now and then. He's quieter than he used to be, but he smiles when he sees me. We don't talk about his son. We don't talk about that day. We just sit together, usually on his porch, drinking coffee or beer, looking out at his yard as the sun goes down. Sometimes, when the light fades and the sky turns that deep blue, I look over at him and wonder what dreams he has now, and if they wake him up at night, leaving him with a feeling he can't shake and no memory of why. Because some things stay with you forever, even if you don't talk about them. Some things sink so deep into you that no amount of time can pull them out. That day was one of those things for me. I don't think it'll ever leave. And every time my wife wakes up from a dream and sits there in the dark, staring at the wall, I feel my chest tighten. I wait for her to say something. Most times she doesn't. But when she does, I listen, and I believe her. Because even if I don't understand it, even if it never makes sense, I know better than to ignore it. Not after that day. Not after Danny. Not after his son. I got off work around 6 that evening. It was one of those days where your brain feels half melted by the time you clock out. My feet hurt from standing all day. My back ached from bending and lifting boxes, and my arms felt heavy even just carrying my keys and phone back inside. When I got home, I kicked off my shoes by the front door and walked upstairs to my room on the second floor, shutting the door behind me like always. My little brother was downstairs in the living room, glued to the TV with his usual pile of snacks around him. I could hear the TV echoing faintly through the house as I laid down on my bed. The ceiling fan was spinning slowly above me, creaking with every turn. The dog, Daisy, was curled up just outside my door in the hallway. She always stayed there when I was in my room, like my personal guard dog, even though she was just a brown and white mutt with a stubby tail and a slightly crooked ear. I could hear her breathing softly, little puffs of air as she drifted off. I laid there scrolling on my phone, barely moving. My uniform smelled like sweat and old cardboard. I planned on showering but didn't have the energy yet, so I just scrolled through memes, half reading them, eyes drooping every few minutes. Outside my window the sun was dipping down, the sky turning a dull pinkish gray. I could hear a car or two pass by in the street below. The house was warm but not too hot. Everything felt normal. Safe. Then Daisy started up. At first it was just a low whine, and I ignored it, thinking she was dreaming or wanted to come inside my room. But suddenly she exploded with noise. Barking, howling, claws skittering on the hardwood as she jumped around. The suddenness of it made me jolt upright. My heart thumped hard in my chest. She barked and barked like someone was at the door or she'd seen a squirrel, but it sounded different. More intense, almost frantic. I swung my legs off the bed to stand up, ready to open my door and tell her to chill out before she woke the whole street. As I reached for the doorknob, I heard a man's voice. Deep and calm, like someone talking to a puppy. It said, "Ah, that's a good girl." The words went through me like a cold breeze. I paused with my hand on the knob. It wasn't my brother's voice. It wasn't squeaky and teenage. It wasn't my dad's voice either, deeper but rougher from smoking. The only person it could have been was my dad's friend, our roommate. He sometimes got off work early and came home before my dad. I relaxed a bit then and called out, "Oh, you're home early," as I twisted the knob and opened the door. But when I stepped out into the hallway, there was no one. Just Daisy, tail wagging hard, her entire but swinging back and forth with the force of it. Her tongue lolled out the side of her mouth as she looked up at me, then turned her head back to stare down the hallway toward the staircase like she was waiting for someone to come back. The hair on the back of my neck lifted a little. I called out again, but didn't hear anything back. I walked to the top of the stairs and looked down. The TV was still playing loudly in the living room. My little brother was sitting cross-legged on the carpet, controller in hand, eyes locked on the screen. He heard me moving around and shouted up, "What the hell did you say to Daisy? She's freaking out down here." I called back, "What do you mean? I just came out because she was barking." He paused his game and came stomping up the stairs. He was wearing his usual black sweatpants and an old hoodie with holes in the sleeves. He looked annoyed, his hair all flat on one side from leaning on the couch cushion. I heard someone say "good girl" to her. I thought it was you or Dan. We both went quiet then, looking at each other. Daisy kept wagging her tail, eyes locked on the empty space at the end of the hallway. The skin on my arms prickled up. My brother grabbed his BB gun from his room, and I pulled out my butterfly knife from my nightstand drawer. We didn't really think someone was there, but the voice was so clear. It felt like we had to check. We searched every room upstairs first. My room, his room, the bathroom, our dad's room. The closets were empty except for old coats, spare sheets, dusty boxes. I checked under my bed, even though there wasn't enough space for a person to hide there. We went downstairs, flicking on every light. We checked behind the couch, under the kitchen table, in the laundry room. Nothing. The back door was locked. All the windows were locked too. Finally, we checked the garage. It smelled like oil and old tools in there. The car was gone. Dad was still at work, and Dan's motorcycle was gone too, which meant he wasn't home yet either. My brother walked around with his BB gun raised like a SWAT officer, clearing corners dramatically. I flicked on the light by the water heater and checked behind it. Nothing. The dog followed us around, wagging happily, sniffing corners like we were playing a fun game with her. After we finished checking the garage, we both stood there for a minute in the quiet. I could hear my own breathing loud in my ears. My brother lowered his BB gun and looked at me with wide eyes. Who the hell said that then? I didn't answer. We both walked back into the house. Daisy trotted in ahead of us and laid back down in the hallway like nothing had happened. I shut my bedroom door and locked it when I went back in. I sat down on my bed, staring at the floor for a while. The sun was fully down now, and the only light in my room came from my phone screen and the dim lamp in the corner. Later that night, when Dad and Dan got home, we told them what happened. They just shrugged it off. Dad said maybe we imagined it, or maybe someone's TV was playing loud outside, but our windows had been closed, and the voice sounded like it was inside the house, just a few feet from where I stood behind my door. I never really figured it out. We never heard it again, and Daisy never acted that way again either. But sometimes when I'm home alone and the dog perks her ears up at nothing, I feel that same prickle on the back of my neck. That cold feeling that makes your arms break out in goosebumps. Like someone is standing just behind me, breathing softly, waiting for me to turn around. But I don't turn around. I just keep my eyes forward and pretend I didn't hear anything at all, because I don't want to hear that voice ever again. I don't really like thinking about that night because it makes my chest feel tight, but sometimes I lie in bed and my brain just goes back to it without me wanting it to. I was working at the warehouse back then, the one near the old railway yard. I did night shifts for extra pay, mostly just walking up and down checking doors, loading small pallets, sometimes wrapping packages. It was quiet work. Most nights nothing happened, just the sound of forklifts humming in the distance or metal carts rattling when someone moved them. That night started like any other. It was hot, hotter than usual for late September. I remember walking from the break room to the side dock just to get some air. The warehouse is huge, the ceiling's so high you feel small, with long rows of shelves stacked with brown boxes tied in clear wrap. It smells like cardboard oil and dust. Outside the loading dock, the air smelled like warm gravel and faint diesel from trucks parked for the morning. My shift started at 6 p.m. and would end at 4 a.m. By midnight, my legs already ached. I took my 15-minute break sitting on a crate, looking at my phone. At some point, the supervisor asked me to check pallets at the far end near the disused part of the building. It used to be a steel fabrication area decades ago before they turned it into storage, but half of it was still blocked off with old yellow chains and faded caution signs. They never cleaned that side properly. Pipes stuck out from the floor, walls had stains, and the concrete was cracked. I grabbed my scanner gun and walked down the middle aisle. The fluorescent lights flickered every now and then, making that buzzing noise that gets under your skin. The wheels of my work boots crunched bits of fallen cardboard corners and stray staples on the ground. The pallets I needed to scan were way in the back corner, almost where the lights ended. I hate that side of the building. You can hear water dripping somewhere even though no pipes are active back there, and it feels colder than the rest of the place. I started scanning boxes, checking numbers, ticking them off on the gun. I like the beeping sound it makes because it breaks up the silence. I finished the last pallet on my list and turned around to head back. As I walked past one of the blocked-off areas, I noticed the yellow chain was broken and lying on the floor. I stopped for a second and just looked at it. It wasn't snapped or cut, just unhooked from one of the rusty poles. I bent down and hooked it back in place. I felt uneasy, like I was trespassing even though it was part of the building. When I stood up, I heard a dragging sound behind me, like something heavy being pulled across concrete. My body went still. I held my breath without even thinking. The sound stopped. I turned slowly, looking back towards the dark part behind the chain. Nothing moved. I told myself maybe it was an old pallet shifting, or maybe a rat knocking something over. But it didn't sound like that. It sounded too long, too steady. I walked away faster than usual, feeling my knees weak, the scanner gun cold and slippery in my hand from sweat. As I moved back into the lit area, I felt stupid for feeling scared. I told myself it was nothing. I kept working for another hour, moving boxes closer to the front for morning pickup. But that feeling in my stomach wouldn't leave. It was like I could feel eyes on my back, but every time I turned around, there was nothing. Just metal racks stacked with boxes of gloves, hardware, car parts. Just shelves and concrete and shadows. At around 2 in the morning, I had to take trash to the dumpster out back. The dumpster is behind the building, down a narrow lane between the warehouse and the old rail fence. There's one light above the back door, but the rest of the lane is dark. I hate going out there alone, especially at night. I rolled the trash bin outside, the wheels squeaking over cracks in the concrete. The air smelled sharp, like rust and old oil from the dumpster. I opened the metal lid, holding it with one hand while I tipped the bag in with the other. The metal banged loud when I dropped the lid. When I turned around to pull the trash bin back inside, I froze. There was someone standing down near the fence, halfway hidden by shadows. My heart jumped so hard it felt like my ribs shook. I couldn't see their face, just a tall shape, maybe 6 feet, wearing dark clothes. They weren't moving. They just stood there, like they were waiting. I couldn't tell if they were looking at me. I couldn't even move at first. Then I forced myself to push the trash bin inside as quickly as I could without running. Once I got back inside, I locked the door. My hands were shaking so bad I had to sit down on an overturned bucket for a minute. I tried to think of reasons why someone would be out there. Maybe a homeless guy looking for cans, or a driver resting between routes. But why just stand there, hidden in the dark? Why not move or say something? My skin crawled thinking about it. I went back to work, but my head kept turning to look at the back door, waiting to see the handle turn or hear knocking. Nothing happened. At 3:30, I took my last break before shift end. I sat on a pile of flattened boxes near the side dock, drinking water. My mouth felt dry and my chest tight. I just wanted the night to end. Then I heard it again, the dragging sound. This time it was coming from the other side of the metal wall, like someone was dragging something along the exterior of the building. The sound moved slowly towards the dock door. I stood up and stepped back into the warehouse, listening. The dragging stopped. I waited, feeling sweat roll down my neck. Then I heard a loud metallic clang against the dock door. My legs almost gave out. It was like someone hit the metal from outside with something heavy. I ran to the main warehouse floor, finding the supervisor by the pallet stacker. He looked at me with tired eyes when I told him I heard noises outside. He sighed and said probably raccoons or stray dogs. He told me to finish my area before clocking out. I didn't go back to the dock. I stayed on the main floor, moving boxes around, cleaning up empty wrap rolls. My eyes kept flicking to the dock door, expecting to see it rattle or bulge inward. At 4, the shift ended. I clocked out and walked to my car parked near the dark side of the building. I walked fast, scanning the shadows. My car felt like safety. As soon as I got in and locked the doors, I exhaled, my hands gripping the steering wheel so tight my knuckles went white. I started the engine and pulled out. As I drove past the side of the building, my headlights swept over the fence line where I saw that person earlier. My stomach dropped. There was a man standing there again, same spot. This time he was facing me directly. His clothes were dark, and his hair was long and unkempt. He looked like he hadn't washed in weeks. His face was thin, and his eyes were wide open, staring right into my headlights. He didn't move. He just stood there watching as I drove past. I drove home with my heart pounding, checking my rearview mirror the whole way, half expecting to see him chasing my car down the empty streets. When I got home, the sun was just starting to come up. I sat in my car for a while before going inside, trying to calm down. My hands wouldn't stop shaking. I didn't sleep well that day. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw his face, pale and wide-eyed, staring at me from the fence line. I called off work the next night. I told them I was sick. I couldn't face going back there so soon, not after that. When I did go back 2 days later, I told the supervisor again about the man outside. He just shrugged and said he'd ask security to do a drive around that week. But I knew they wouldn't find anything. That man wasn't there for the dumpster or the fence. He was there for people, watching them, waiting for them to be alone. After that, I never took trash out by myself again. I never worked past midnight alone on the far end of the building. If something fell or a chain was down, I left it for day shift. The feeling I had that night never really left me. Even now, when I park in dark places or walk near fences at night, my chest tightens. I keep thinking about that dragging sound, the clang against the metal door, and his eyes staring at me in the dark like he'd been there the whole time, waiting for the moment I was alone. I woke up at 5 that morning because I couldn't sleep. My body felt heavy, and my eyes burned from tossing and turning all night. The fan above me spun slowly, clicking with each rotation like a heartbeat echoing in the silent room. The sheets were twisted around my legs. I pulled them off and sat on the edge of the bed for a while, staring at the dark window. It was still too early for the sun to rise, but the birds were already starting to wake up. Their chirps came faint through the closed glass. I rubbed my face and sighed. I got up and walked into the kitchen. The tile floor was cold under my feet. I made myself a cup of coffee, holding the mug close to my face to feel the heat against my skin. I didn't turn on any lights. I just stood there in the dim glow of the streetlights outside. My phone was charging on the counter. I checked the time again. 5:12. Too early to do anything productive, but too late to go back to sleep. I finished my coffee and set the mug down in the sink. My stomach was tight and uncomfortable. I wasn't sure if I was hungry or sick. After standing there for a while, I decided to go out for a walk. Maybe it would help clear my head. I put on my shoes without socks, grabbed my keys, and stepped outside. The air was humid and heavy, with a faint smell of dirt and grass. It felt like it would be another hot day. The sky was still dark, but turning that deep blue before sunrise. The street was silent, not even cars driving past. I walked down the driveway and turned onto the road. I walked with my hands in my pockets, kicking small stones off the asphalt as I went. The neighborhood was quiet, and every house I passed was dark except for a few porch lights left on overnight. My footsteps echoed on the road. As I walked, I noticed how still everything felt, like the world was paused, waiting for something to happen. Even the trees weren't moving. I walked past the small park near the entrance to the neighborhood. The swings moved slightly, probably from the breeze I couldn't feel. I kept going, heading towards the trail that ran along the creek behind the houses. It wasn't a proper trail, just a dirt path people used to cut through to the other side of the street or walk their dogs. I had walked it plenty of times in the day, but never this early in the morning when it was still dark. I reached the entrance to the trail. It was just two posts with a chain hanging low between them. I stepped over it and walked onto the dirt path. The trees around the trail were thick. Branches hung low, and I had to duck under a few. The dirt was damp from the sprinklers that ran at night. I could hear the creek running faintly in the distance, just a quiet trickling sound through the brush. As I walked deeper down the trail, it got darker. The tree canopy blocked out the faint blue sky above. I could barely see where I was stepping, but my feet knew the path well enough to follow it. The smell of damp earth and decaying leaves was strong. Every so often, I heard rustling in the bushes to the side, probably rabbits or possums. I tried not to think about it too much. I walked until I reached the small wooden bridge that crossed the creek. The bridge was old, and the wood creaked under my weight as I stepped onto it. I stopped in the middle and leaned against the railing, looking down at the water. I couldn't see much, just the dark surface reflecting tiny specks of the sky. I stood there for a long time, listening to the water and the occasional rustle in the bushes. I started feeling like someone was watching me. I turned and looked back down the path, but it was empty, just the dark trail and the trees standing silent. I felt my chest tighten a little. The feeling wouldn't go away, like there were eyes hidden somewhere between the trunks, staring at me. I took a deep breath and shook my head. I told myself it was just the dark playing tricks on me. I turned and started walking back across the bridge. As I stepped off the bridge, I heard something snap behind me. A branch, like someone had stepped on it. I stopped. My heart thudded hard in my chest. I turned around slowly and looked back at the bridge. There was nothing there, just the wooden planks and the railing disappearing into the darkness. I stood still for a few seconds, straining my ears to hear anything else. There was nothing, just the creek and the faint chirping of early birds. I turned back towards the trail and kept walking, a little faster this time. The feeling of being watched only grew stronger. Every step I took, I felt like something was following just behind me, staying in the dark. I tried to ignore it, focusing on the sound of my shoes crunching on the dirt. The path curved to the left, and as I rounded the corner, I heard another rustle behind me, louder this time, like something moving quickly through the brush. My chest felt tight, and my breath came out shaky. I didn't want to turn around, but I did. Again, nothing. Just darkness and trees. I started walking faster, almost a jog, but I tried to keep my steps quiet. My ears rang with the sound of blood rushing through them. My mouth was dry. I didn't want to run because I felt like whatever it was would chase me if I did. I just kept my pace fast and steady. The exit to the trail was up ahead, the faint glow of streetlights filtering through the trees. I focused on that light, telling myself I just needed to get there. I was only a few meters away when I heard a sudden crashing noise behind me, like something big running through the bushes. I felt a jolt of fear shoot through my chest, and I broke into a run. My feet pounded on the dirt, and my breath came out in short gasps. I burst out of the trail entrance onto the street. I turned around quickly, looking back at the dark path. There was nothing there, just silence. My whole body was shaking. Sweat dripped down my back. I stood there under the streetlight, trying to catch my breath. My heart was hammering so hard I felt like I might throw up. I kept staring at the entrance to the trail, waiting to see something step out. But nothing did. I turned and started walking back towards home. My legs felt weak, and I could barely keep a straight pace. I kept looking behind me every few steps, checking to see if I was being followed. The sun was starting to rise now, painting the sky in pale orange. The birds were louder, and I could hear the distant hum of cars on the main road as people started their morning commutes. When I got back home, I locked the door behind me and leaned against it, breathing hard. My shirt was damp with sweat. I walked to the kitchen and poured myself a glass of water, drinking it down in one long gulp. My hands were shaking so much I almost dropped the glass. I set it down on the counter and sat at the table, staring at nothing. I didn't know what had followed me down that trail. Maybe it was a stray dog or a coyote. Maybe it was just a deer running through the brush. But the way it moved didn't feel like an animal. It felt like it was purposefully staying just out of sight, watching me, staying close enough that I could hear it, but not see it. Like it knew how to stay hidden. I sat there for a long time, waiting for the sun to fully rise. When the room was bright and the shadows were gone, I finally felt like I could breathe again. I got up and took a shower, washing off the sweat and dirt. As the water ran down my face, I thought about how close it had felt. Whatever it was just behind me, close enough to reach out and grab me if it wanted to. That feeling stayed with me all day. I tried to distract myself with work and chores around the house, but every time I closed my eyes I saw the dark trail and heard the branches snapping behind me. I kept checking the windows, looking out into the yard like I expected to see something standing there. When night came again, I made sure every door and window was locked. I closed the blinds and turned on all the lights in the house. I didn't want any shadows. I didn't want to see the dark. I lay in bed that night, staring at the ceiling fan spinning above me. The clicking sound echoed through the room. I pulled the blanket up to my chest and tried to calm my breathing. I told myself it was just an animal. There was nothing out there. But no matter how many times I told myself that, I couldn't shake the feeling that it wasn't over. That whatever had been out there in the dark, whatever had followed me down that trail, was still out there. Watching, waiting. I didn't sleep much that night. Every noise outside made my heart jump. I kept thinking about how quiet it was on that trail, how empty it felt, and how close it came without me ever seeing it. And I knew deep down that I would never walk that trail in the dark again. Because whatever it was, I didn't want to find out what it would do if I let it get close enough to touch me. I woke up before my alarm even had the chance to ring. The room was still dark except for the faint blue glow from my phone charging on the small wooden table beside my bed. For a few minutes, I just laid there listening to the ticking of the clock on the wall. It felt colder than usual. I could hear a slight rattle of the window frame every now and then from the morning breeze outside. After staring at the ceiling for a while, I finally pulled myself out of bed. My back cracked as I stretched my arms upward. I walked barefoot across the cold cement floor towards the bathroom, trying not to step on the pair of sandals lying in the middle of the path. I turned on the tap and splashed water on my face. I felt tired, but I knew I had a long day ahead. I was supposed to go help an old acquaintance clear out his grandfather's small abandoned cabin up in the hills. He was planning to sell the land, but wanted to clean out the place first. I didn't have anything else planned for that Sunday, so I agreed when he asked me earlier in the week. It was only about an hour drive north, then a short hike off the side of a dirt road. I put on a pair of faded jeans, a gray t-shirt, and my old black hoodie. Before leaving, I made some toast, standing by the kitchen window while eating it slowly. Outside, I could see the neighbor's cat sitting on the brick wall, licking its paw over and over. The street was quiet. I didn't bother making coffee. I grabbed my backpack and checked if I had everything: water bottle, small first aid pouch, a snack bar, gloves, and my folding knife. I locked the door behind me and got into my car. The drive was peaceful. The sun came up slowly as I went further away from town. The roads became narrower and bumpier as I drove past open fields, then groves of tall, thin trees with dark green leaves that barely moved in the breeze. I drove with my window half down, feeling the cool air blowing into the car. There was a slight smell of damp earth mixed with wildflowers growing on the roadside. Eventually, I turned onto an unmarked dirt road that curved up a hill. I followed it until I saw his car parked under a small tree. I parked behind it and turned off the engine. For a moment, I just sat there listening to the quiet. I could hear some birds calling out from deeper in the woods. When I got out, I saw him standing a few meters away. He nodded at me and started walking. I followed. We walked uphill for about 20 minutes through the trees. The ground was uneven with dry leaves crunching under my boots. The path wasn't really a path, more like a natural clearing where grass didn't grow. My legs were already tired by the time I saw the small wooden cabin ahead. The door was hanging slightly open, the roof sagging in the middle, and the whole place looked gray and forgotten. He told me to start cleaning out anything we could carry down while he looked for some old tools behind the shed. I didn't argue. I pushed the door open fully and stepped inside. It smelled of stale air, old wood, and something else I couldn't place at first. Dust floated around me as the sun came through the cracked windows. There was a small metal-framed bed in the corner with a thin mattress that looked like it hadn't been slept on in decades. An old desk stood against the other wall with a broken oil lamp and a rusted tin cup on top. In the far corner, A stack of newspapers sat half-collapsed with mouse droppings scattered around them. I started gathering some of the old tools and items lying on the floor. I stacked them near the door to carry out later. After half an hour, I felt sweat rolling down my back. The air felt heavy inside. I stepped back out to breathe in the fresh breeze. He was still behind the shed, moving some rusted metal pipes around. I decided to check the small attached storage room before taking the first load down. I pushed the warped door with my shoulder until it scraped open. Inside it was darker. The small window was covered with something from the outside. I could smell that strange bitter odor stronger in here. I pulled out my phone and turned on the flashlight. The floor was littered with old paint cans, tangled fishing lines, rotting cardboard boxes, and a few broken clay pots. I bent down to pick up some small metal items when I noticed a pile of what looked like old rags shoved into the corner under a broken shelf. The smell was stronger there. I moved closer and poked at the rags with a stick lying nearby. They weren't just rags. There was something else mixed in with them. I crouched down and used the stick to pull away some of the cloth. That's when I saw hair. Dark brown hair stuck together in clumps. My stomach tightened. I pushed the cloth away more and saw a part of a face, or what used to be a face. The skin was dried and sunken, stretched tight over the cheekbone. The eye socket was dark and empty. I dropped the stick and scrambled backwards, almost knocking over a box of rusted nails. For a few seconds, I just stood there staring at it. My breathing felt tight. My ears rang a little. I looked back into the main room to see if he was there, but he wasn't. I didn't want to shout. My chest felt cold, like my heart was beating in ice water. I turned back towards the corner and forced myself to look again. The body was curled up, knees drawn to chest, like it had been shoved in or crawled there. The clothes were barely visible, just scraps of dark cloth stuck to bone. I backed out of the storage room and stood in the main cabin, feeling my pulse in my temples. I kept thinking about how long it must have been there, who it was, why they were there. I could hear him walking back around from the shed. I didn't want to be the one to find something like that. I didn't want to deal with police and questions. I didn't want to see the newspapers later with my name quoted under some article about human remains found in an abandoned cabin. I walked outside and told him we needed to leave. He looked at me and asked why, but I just shook my head and started walking back down the hill. My legs felt shaky on the uneven ground. The sun was higher now, warm on my face, but my arms felt cold and my fingertips tingled. I kept picturing that face in the darkness of the storage room. Every time I blinked, I saw the empty eye socket. When I reached my car, I unlocked it and got in, shutting the door hard behind me. I sat there with my hands gripping the steering wheel. My breathing felt shallow, and I forced myself to take long, deep breaths. He was still up by the cabin, probably confused about why I left so suddenly. I didn't care. I just wanted to go home. I started the engine and turned the car around carefully on the narrow dirt road. As I drove back down towards the main road, I kept glancing in the rearview mirror, half expecting to see someone running after me. But there was nothing, just the empty winding track behind me. The drive home felt longer than the drive there. I kept the window shut this time. The radio was off. All I could hear was the humming of the engine and the crunch of gravel under the tires. My hands felt clammy on the steering wheel. Every few minutes I would rub them on my jeans to dry them. When I finally got back to town, I pulled into the small grocery store parking lot and just sat there for a while. I watched people coming and going with their shopping bags, kids running around the entrance, a man in an orange vest gathering shopping carts. Everything felt normal, peaceful, like what I just saw didn't even exist in the same world as this. Eventually I drove home. I parked in the usual spot under the neem tree. I locked the car and walked upstairs to my apartment. I threw my backpack on the floor and went straight to the bathroom to wash my hands and face. The water felt ice cold against my skin. I sat down on the edge of my bed and stared at the floor. My room felt safe and clean. The fan spun lazily above me. That night I lay in bed for hours, unable to sleep. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw the dark storage room with the body curled up in the corner. I kept thinking about who it was. What had happened? Why no one found them before? Why they were left like that? I wondered if they were scared when it happened, or if they simply fell asleep and never woke up. My chest felt heavy every time I imagined their last moments in that dark place, with no one there, no one coming to look. Days passed. I didn't tell anyone about it. I kept waiting to see something on the news about the discovery, but nothing ever came up. I guessed he decided to call the authorities eventually, or maybe he didn't. I stopped replying to his messages. I didn't want to think about it anymore. But late at night when the room was quiet, and the only sound was my own breathing, I would see that I socket again, empty and dark, and feel that same cold tightness in my chest. I started taking longer walks around the neighborhood, just to be outside among people, cars, lights, dogs barking from yards. It made the memory feel smaller somehow. Less sharp, less heavy. Life carried on. People carried their shopping bags. Kids played cricket in the street. The neighbors hosed down their driveways every morning. I watched all of it, standing quietly with my hands in my pockets, feeling the sun on my face, trying to forget the cold darkness of that storage room. And I knew, no matter how normal everything looked, there would always be places like that out there, silent and hidden, holding secrets that no one wanted to find. I never liked driving at night. The darkness always felt too big, like it swallowed up everything beyond what my headlights could touch. But that evening, I didn't really have a choice. I was coming back from visiting my uncle in the next town over. It was already getting late when I left, and I remember thinking about how I should have left earlier, but there was traffic earlier in the day, and I didn't want to sit through it. The road between his town and mine wasn't exactly a highway. It was more like a two-lane country road cutting through fields and patches of woods, with long stretches where there were no streetlights or houses in sight. There weren't many cars either. Every so often, one would pass by, but for the most part it felt like I was the only person out there. I had the windows cracked just a little because the air felt stale inside. I kept my eyes on the white lines in front of me, the broken paint zipping past in rhythm with the bumps on the asphalt. My phone was in the passenger seat, plugged into the car charger. Music was playing quietly from the speakers, but it wasn't enough to keep me completely awake. I was tired. I remember yawning so hard that my eyes watered. About halfway home, I passed a gas station. It was small, only a single row of pumps and a little shop, and it was closed for the night. The only light was from the pump area itself, that dull yellow glow spilling onto the concrete. I thought about stopping to stretch my legs, but I didn't want to stand there alone under those flickering lights with the empty dark all around. I kept driving. The road curved gently left, then right, and eventually I got to a long, straight stretch lined on both sides with trees. Tall trees, old ones, their tops disappearing into the black above. I was maybe 5 minutes into that part when I saw something on the side of the road ahead. At first I thought it was an animal because I could see it moving, but as I got closer, my headlights caught it fully, and I saw that it was a person. He was standing right on the edge of the pavement, like he was waiting to cross, except there wasn't anything on the other side except forest. He had dark clothes on, jeans and a black hoodie with the hood up, so I couldn't see his face. He didn't even flinch as I drove past, just kept standing there facing the road. It felt weird, seeing him alone out there in the middle of the night, so far from any houses or towns. I felt a chill run down my back, but I kept driving. I told myself maybe his car broke down and he was waiting for help, but I didn't see any car nearby. I didn't like it. My hands were tight on the wheel, and I turned the music up a little to distract myself. A few minutes later, I saw another figure on the side of the road. This one was a woman, I think. She was wearing light jeans and a red sweater, and she was walking with her back to me, just outside the edge of the trees. Her head was down, arms crossed over her chest like she was cold. I slowed down a bit as I passed her because it was so strange. Why would someone be walking out here at night with nothing around for miles? I didn't stop, though. Something deep in my stomach told me not to. I drove on, feeling a tightness in my chest that wouldn't go away. My eyes kept flicking to the rearview mirror, but the road behind me was empty. I checked the clock on the dashboard. It was just after 11. I knew I had about 40 minutes left to get home. The road curved again, and the trees pulled back for a while into flat fields of grass and brush. My headlights swept across the open land, but I couldn't see much beyond the first few rows of weeds. It was just black. I kept thinking about those two people I saw. They didn't look homeless. Their clothes were clean. They didn't look drunk either. I tried to come up with any explanation to make it feel normal, but I couldn't. A while later, I was back in another wooded stretch when I saw something else. My headlights caught it just in time for me to swerve slightly to avoid hitting it. There was a bicycle laying halfway into the road. Its back tire was twisted like it had been run over, and it looked old, with rust on the frame. I slowed down and stopped the car a few feet past it. I sat there with the engine idling, staring into the rearview mirror at the bike laying there. I felt a tight ball of anxiety form in my throat. I didn't want to get out of the car. I didn't want to walk back there and move it. I didn't see anyone nearby, and it didn't look like it had been dropped recently. It looked like it had been there for a while. But still, something in me felt wrong about leaving it blocking the road. After sitting for almost a full minute, I took a deep breath, unbuckled my seatbelt, and stepped out into the night. The air felt cold against my skin. The only sound was the quiet ticking of my engine cooling in the breeze. I walked back towards the bike, each step feeling heavier than the last. My eyes flicked to the trees on both sides. Everything beyond the reach of my taillights was pure black. I got to the bike and grabbed the handlebars to drag it off the road. As I moved it, I noticed something strange. The chain was missing. The seat was bent, and the front tire was flat. It didn't make sense to leave a bike like that in the middle of the road. I pulled it fully onto the shoulder and turned around to walk back to my car. That's when I heard a noise. Just a small sound at first, like something moving through the brush on the opposite side of the road. I froze, listening hard. My heart was thumping in my chest so loud I could hear it in my ears. The noise came again, closer this time, like footsteps crunching leaves. I couldn't see anything. I squinted into the trees, but it was all shadows and shapes that didn't move. Then I heard it again, but this time from the other side, behind me, near the bike I had just moved. It was like there were two people moving around me, staying out of the light. I felt panic rise up inside me like a wave. I turned and jogged back to my car as fast as I could without actually sprinting. I didn't want to run and look stupid if it was just animals, but at the same time, every instinct I had was screaming at me to get back inside. I reached my car, yanked open the door, and slammed it shut behind me. I locked the doors, threw it in drive, and pulled away as quickly as I could without spinning out. I kept looking in the rearview mirror for a while, but there was nothing there. My hands were shaking. I didn't stop again until I was nearly home. I pulled into the gas station near my neighborhood to calm down. I sat there in the car, staring at the steering wheel, trying to slow my breathing. My eyes felt dry and itchy, and my neck hurt from how tense I'd been. Eventually I went inside, bought a bottle of water, and came back out. The fluorescent lights felt harsh and too bright after so long in the dark, but I was grateful for them. I sat there for a while longer, just letting myself feel safe. When I finally drove the last few minutes home, my street felt so comforting with its little houses and porch lights. I pulled into my driveway and sat for a moment, looking around to make sure everything was normal. Then I grabbed my phone and bag and went inside. I couldn't sleep that night. I kept thinking about the people I saw on the side of the road, about the bicycle, about the noises in the woods. I couldn't make sense of any of it. The next morning, I told my neighbor about it while we were both out getting the mail. He said there had been a few incidents on that road recently. Cars getting broken into, people getting robbed after stopping to help stranded drivers. He told me I was lucky I didn't get out of my car when I saw those people. I didn't say anything. I just nodded and went back inside. But for days after that, I kept thinking about it. I kept thinking about how easy it would have been for someone to force me out of my car. How easy it would have been for them to hide in the woods, waiting for someone to stop and check on that bike. Now, whenever I have to drive at night, I keep my doors locked, and I never, ever stop for anything unless it's unavoidable. I think about those footsteps in the woods, those silent figures on the roadside, and how I was just a tired driver alone in the dark. And even now, whenever I drive down that road during the day, I always feel like someone is watching from behind the trees, just waiting for the next car to come along. I never found out who those people were, or if the bike was really just trash or a trap. But I know one thing for sure. That night taught me it's not the dark itself you should be afraid of. It's the people hiding in it. I don't really know where to start because my brain keeps flashing back to different points of that day. It was supposed to be a normal Sunday. I woke up at around 7 in the morning. The sun was already out, but the sky still had that soft blue tint that it gets before the day really starts heating up. I remember sitting up on my mattress on the floor, looking at the curtain swaying because of the ceiling fan, and thinking about breakfast. That's how normal it started. I decided I'd go for a run first. I hadn't been running in weeks because of work being so busy. I laced up my shoes, filled up my water bottle, and stepped outside. The street was quiet. Only 2 cars passed me as I walked down to the end of my road to start jogging from the park gate. The air smelled dusty, like it hadn't rained for days, and there was that faint smell of fried oil from the hotel nearby. I started running slowly, feeling my knees complain a bit, but after a few minutes I found my rhythm. The park wasn't crowded. A couple of old men walked together in the far lane. A group of women were doing yoga under a tree. Birds were making a racket overhead, and I could hear squirrels chasing each other through the leaves. I felt calm for the first time in weeks. My job had been stressing me out, and I thought, today I'll just take it slow. After running 2 laps around the park, I stopped to drink water. I stood under a neem tree, feeling the rough bark against my back. I could feel my shirt sticking to my chest and back because of sweat. My breathing was fast but felt good. I checked my phone. It was only 8. I thought I'd run another lap and go home to make eggs and paratha. I was almost done with the 3rd lap when I noticed a man standing near the broken exercise machines. At first, I didn't think anything of it. He looked like anyone else in the park, just wearing black trousers and a gray t-shirt. His hair was oily and combed back. I ran past him without giving a second glance. But on my 4th lap, he was still standing there, staring at the track. Not moving, not stretching or walking, just standing there. It made me feel weird. I don't know why. I kept my eyes forward and finished my lap quickly. When I was about to exit the park, I looked back. He was still standing there, but his head was turned towards me now. I quickly turned away and walked out. Maybe he was just waiting for someone. I told myself not to overthink. I walked home, breathing in the smell of dust and leaves. When I reached my gate, I saw my neighbor, an old lady, sweeping outside. I nodded at her. She smiled back without stopping her sweeping. I unlocked my gate and stepped into my front yard. I noticed some trash had blown in from the street, chip wrappers and plastic cups. I picked them up and dumped them in my bin before going inside. I took off my shoes near the door and went straight to the kitchen. I cooked 2 eggs, made paratha, and had it with leftover potato curry from last night. While eating, I opened my window to let some fresh air in. That's when I saw him, the same man from the park. He was standing across the street, near the electric pole. He wasn't looking at anything in particular, just standing there, hands hanging at his sides, staring ahead. I felt my stomach twist. I looked away quickly, trying to calm myself down. Maybe he lived nearby and was just waiting for a rickshaw. But after 15 minutes, when I washed my plate and looked out again, he was still there. I shut the window and pulled the curtain. My breathing felt uneven. I didn't want to act paranoid, but something felt off. I tried to distract myself by cleaning my kitchen, wiping the counters, scrubbing the sink, sweeping the floor. Every few minutes, I kept thinking about him standing out there. Finally, I told myself it's not my problem. I went to shower. The cold water felt good on my skin. I let it run down my head and back, trying to relax my shoulders. When I came out, I felt better. I put on a clean t-shirt and shorts and sat down to check some work emails on my phone. Around 10, I heard a car honking loudly outside. I went to the window and moved the curtain slightly to look out. The man was gone. I felt such relief in my chest that I laughed under my breath. I spent the next few hours doing housework, listening to the radio. Around noon, I started feeling hungry again. I decided to cook rice with lentils for lunch. As I was cutting onions, I heard footsteps outside. My heart jumped into my throat. I told myself it's just someone walking by. But I walked to the window and peeked through the side of the curtain. He was back, standing under the tree across the street, staring at my house. I dropped the curtain and backed away. I felt like my skin was buzzing with fear. My breathing was shaky. I turned off the stove and walked into my living room. I sat down on the sofa, thinking what I should do. I didn't want to call the police for no reason. He wasn't technically doing anything, just standing there, but my chest felt heavy with panic. I went back to the kitchen quietly, turned the stove back on, and finished cooking. I ate quickly, barely tasting anything. I kept thinking about what if he tried to come to the gate or break in. After lunch, I tried to read a book, but I couldn't focus. Every creak of the house, every sound outside made my heart pound harder. At 3, I looked out again. He was still there. His head was tilted down, but I could see his eyes were open, staring. My mouth felt dry. I thought about calling a friend to come over, but felt stupid. I sat on the floor against the wall, knees up to my chest, just listening to my breathing. Time passed so slowly. At 5, I looked out again. He was gone. The street was empty. No one was around. My shoulders dropped with relief. I felt drained, completely exhausted. I made tea and drank it while standing at the window, making sure he wasn't coming back. When it got dark, I locked all the windows and doors and shut all the curtains. I cooked dinner, just rice and fried vegetables. I ate quickly and cleaned up. I decided I'd sleep early. Maybe tomorrow would be normal again. I lay down at 8:30, staring at the ceiling. My ears were alert to every sound. Dogs barking, cars driving by, a cat meowing in the street. I kept telling myself he was gone. Nothing would happen. My eyes finally grew heavy, and I fell asleep. I woke up suddenly around midnight. I didn't know why. The room was completely dark except for the faint yellow light coming in through the gaps in my curtain from the streetlight outside. I lay still listening. That's when I heard it. A light scraping sound near my window. My stomach turned to ice. The sound came again, like something sliding slowly against the wall. I got up as quietly as I could and walked to the window. I moved the curtain a tiny bit. My whole body felt cold with fear. He was there, right outside my window, standing so close his nose almost touched the glass. His eyes were open wide, staring in at me, unblinking. His face was lit by the streetlight, and I could see sweat on his forehead. His lips were slightly parted, like he was breathing through his mouth. I stumbled back, feeling my legs weaken. I almost fell. My heart was hammering so hard it felt like it would explode. I stood frozen, not knowing what to do. He raised his hand slowly and pressed his palm against the glass. My breath came out in short gasps. I backed away further, my shoulders hitting the cupboard behind me. I didn't take my eyes off him. Then, without warning, he turned and walked away. Just like that, I heard his footsteps fade down the street. I stayed standing there for a long time, shaking so hard my teeth were chattering. I couldn't understand why he came or what he wanted. I stayed awake the entire night, lights on, watching the window. Morning came slowly, with pale light filling the room. I went outside to look. The dirt under my window was disturbed. I could see footprints there. I felt my chest tighten again. I went back inside and locked everything. I didn't go to work that day. I just sat in my living room, waiting to see if he would come back. He never did. Days passed. Weeks. I never saw him again. But every night, when I close my eyes, I see his face at the window, staring in at me. And I keep thinking about how long he stood there before I woke up. How long he watched me sleeping. And if he's out there somewhere, standing in front of someone else's window right now. Watching. Waiting. I remember that night clearer than most other nights from when I was a kid. It was cold, real cold for Texas, but out here in the desert, it always felt like that in the winter. I was about 6 or 7. My sister was 14, almost 15. My parents trusted her with me all the time because she was a good kid and we never fought. I actually liked having her babysit me because she always made me feel safe, and she'd let me stay up a little later to watch TV with her. That night was the same as most others. We'd eaten dinner earlier. I don't remember what it was, but it was probably something like boxed mac and cheese with cut-up hot dogs, something easy for my sister to make. My parents had gone out, I think to visit some friends across town. They told my sister they'd be home late, probably around 10 or 11. We didn't care. We were sitting in the common room, which was just what we called the living room. It was a big space with a couch against the wall opposite the TV, a recliner chair near the back windows, and a big oval braided rug in the middle of the room. The carpet was old and rough under my knees where I always sat close to the TV because I was little and liked sitting on the floor. The TV was one of those big wood console ones with a curved glass screen. You had to turn a metal dial to change the channels. My sister would always sigh and make me do it because she was comfortable on the couch under a quilt. That night we were watching one of those crime shows she liked. 60 Minutes, 48 Hours, hard copy. They all felt the same to me. All I knew was there was a scary story on it about some guy who went crazy and killed his neighbors. I was only half listening because I was playing with my little yellow Tonka dump truck on the rug, driving it back and forth, pretending to load it with invisible dirt. But when they showed the pictures of the victim's house, all taped off with police tape and blood stains blurred out on the carpet, it made my stomach twist up. I remember glancing back at my sister. She didn't look scared. She just sat there hugging her knees under the quilt, her eyes fixed on the screen like she was trying to memorize everything about it. Outside, the sun had set long ago. Out the back windows there was nothing but blackness. That wall of windows always freaked me out a little at night. You couldn't see out there at all if the back porch light wasn't on. All you saw was your own reflection looking back at you. And if you looked too long, it felt like you were looking at another you, trapped on the other side of the glass. I tried not to look at it. I kept my eyes on the TV or my dump truck. Every now and then I'd glance at the back door. It was a glass sliding door with a metal handle. We didn't have a deadbolt on it, just the knob lock and a little bar we'd wedge into the bottom track so it couldn't slide open. That bar wasn't in place that night. My parents always put it in before bed, but we hadn't bothered since they weren't home yet. The front door was on the opposite side of the room. It was a heavy wood door, dark brown with thick panels. On the outside was a glass storm door with an aluminum frame that squeaked every time you opened it. The front porch had 2 big cement planters my mom kept fake flowers in because real ones always died. There was also a metal rocking chair that would creak in the wind sometimes, making a sound like someone groaning out there. I remember we were about halfway through the show. They were interviewing the neighbor of the guy who did the murders. She was saying he was always quiet, always polite. Nobody expected he could do something like that. My sister made a snorting noise like she thought that was stupid. I remember the heat kicked on, and I could hear it rumble through the vents in the floor. The smell of warm dust filled the room. That smell the heater always made the first few times you used it in winter. Then, out of nowhere, bam bam bam. 3 loud bangs on the front door. The sound exploded through the quiet house like gunshots. My chest squeezed so hard it hurt, and I screamed without even meaning to. My sister screamed too. I scrambled back away from the TV, my dump truck flipping over, and I clutched the rug with both hands. My sister was halfway off the couch, her eyes wide, staring at the front door. Everything went silent after that. The TV kept playing, voices still talking about the murderer on the screen, but I couldn't hear them over the roaring in my ears. My sister and I just sat there frozen. I could hear my own breathing, fast and shallow, and I felt like if I took a big breath, whoever was at the door would hear it too. The only lights on were from the TV and the kitchen down the hall. The kitchen light was yellow and soft, glowing across the floor. Everything else felt like a cave. We sat there, staring at the door, waiting for another bang. But nothing happened. After a while, my sister whispered my name, but I didn't move. She crawled across the carpet to the TV and reached up to turn it off. The metal dial made a loud thunk as she twisted it, and the screen went black, leaving the room even darker. I could barely see her face now, just the pale shape of it in the dim kitchen light. For a few seconds it was silent, except for the sound of the heater humming in the vents. Then I heard it, a squeak and a metallic click. The sound of the storm door on the outside of our front door closing. My stomach twisted so hard I thought I would throw up right there on the carpet. That meant someone had opened it to bang on the door. It wasn't the wind. It wasn't the rocking chair. Someone was out there, close enough to touch the door, close enough to watch us through the little peephole window if they wanted to. I didn't move. I stayed on my knees with my hands balled up tight in my lap. My sister crouched by the TV, staring at me, her eyes flicking from me to the front door over and over like she couldn't figure out what to do. I felt cold all of a sudden, like the heater wasn't working anymore. I turned around slowly to look at the back windows. My reflection was there, dim and fuzzy in the glass. I hated seeing it, hated the way it looked like a shadow boy watching me from outside. Then I saw the back door handle move. At first it was small, just a twitch like someone was lightly testing it. My heart stopped. The handle turned down, gently, like whoever was on the other side was trying not to make noise. It didn't open because the knob lock was turned, but there was no deadbolt. I held my breath so long my chest burned. My sister didn't see it at first. She was still staring at the front door. I watched as the handle turned again, then let go, then again. The sound of it clicking against the lock felt louder than anything I'd ever heard. Then, without warning, bam 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 bam. The back door shook violently in its frame. The whole wall of windows vibrated with each jerk on the handle. I saw my reflection blur and stretch with every pull, my little face twisting in the glass. The banging was so hard I thought the glass would shatter. My body wouldn't move. My mind was screaming at my legs to stand up, but they wouldn't listen. I was stuck there on the carpet, staring at the door as whoever it was tried to force their way in. My sister screamed so loud it made my ears ring. She jumped up, grabbed my arm, and yanked me to my feet. I stumbled after her, my knees hitting the carpet so hard it burned, but she didn't stop dragging me down the hall. We ran into her bedroom. She slammed the door shut behind us and locked it. Then she started shoving things in front of it. Her desk chair, her laundry basket, anything she could grab. Finally, she flipped her mattress off the bed frame and wedged it against the door like a barricade. She grabbed the phone off her nightstand. It was one of those heavy beige cordless phones with a metal antenna you had to pull out to use. I was curled up on the carpet next to her dresser, my arms wrapped around my knees, shaking so hard my teeth were chattering. She kept trying to dial the sheriff, but she couldn't remember the number in her panic. I watched her jab the buttons over and over, her fingers trembling so much she couldn't hit the right ones. Finally, she just hit redial, hoping it would call someone. It rang a few times, and then she started yelling, her voice high and broken, telling whoever it was on the other end that someone was trying to break in and they needed to come right now. I stayed curled up, staring at the carpet fibers under my face, trying not to throw up. My chest hurt from breathing so fast. I couldn't hear anything else from the rest of the house. No more banging, no footsteps, just silence. The phone beeped as my sister hung up. She crawled over to me and pulled me into her lap, rocking me back and forth. I could feel her heart beating through her chest, fast and hard like mine. We stayed like that until we saw headlights flash through her bedroom window. Her friend and her friend's parents pulled up in their truck. I heard car doors slam and voices outside calling our names. My sister finally let go of me and ran out to them, sobbing. Her friend's dad checked the doors, checked the porch, but whoever had been there was gone. They didn't find anything. Just some faint scuff marks on the bottom of the back door where the person had tried to kick or pry it open. We didn't know if they'd always been there or not. My sister's friend's mom stayed with us until my parents came home. I remember sitting on the couch under a blanket, still shaking, staring at the dark TV screen, waiting to see that handle move again. My parents were mad when they got home, not at us, but at whoever was out there. My dad walked around the whole house with his shotgun, but didn't find anything. After that, we always put the bar in the back door track, even if it was the middle of the day. My sister never watched those crime shows again while I was around. She said they gave me nightmares, but I think they gave her nightmares too. Years later, when I was a teenager, I asked her about it. She said she still thinks about that night sometimes, about how it felt to hear someone trying to get in, knowing we were alone and nobody could help us fast enough. She said she still triple checks every lock before she goes to bed, even now with her own kids grown and gone. I do too. I never leave a door unlocked, not even for a minute, because you never know who's out there in the dark watching, and you never know what they're planning to do if they ever get inside. We never found out who. I woke up that morning feeling groggy and heavy-eyed like I hadn't slept at all. The sun was already up, pouring through the cheap blinds and lines across my bedroom floor. For a second I laid there just staring at those bright lines, trying to gather myself before I moved. It was supposed to be a normal day. I had just graduated high school a couple weeks back. I remember my graduation cap was still sitting on the floor by my dresser where I had tossed it. I didn't have any plans that morning. I didn't even feel like I had a future. The world felt wide open and terrifying at the same time. I finally swung my legs off the side of the bed. My room was always cold in the mornings because I kept the fan running all night. I rubbed my face, trying to wake up. I could hear the low hum of the fridge in the kitchen, and the silence beyond that felt strange. My dad always turned on the TV early, even if he wasn't watching it. He just liked the noise, said it kept his mind busy. But there was nothing that morning, just that humming fridge and my own breathing. I stood up and stretched my arms above my head, feeling the soreness in my shoulders from working out the day before. I was trying to build myself up, get strong, trying to become something other than the quiet, skinny kid I was in high school. I yawned and scratched my neck as I walked out of my room, stepping into the narrow hallway that led to the living room. I don't know what I was expecting to see. I thought maybe he went out back to smoke, but the smell hit me first. I can still smell it if I think about it long enough, like stale sweat mixed with something metallic, something that didn't belong in a living room. I remember freezing halfway down the hallway, staring at the back of the recliner. He always sat there in the mornings, leaning forward with his elbows on his knees, TV remote in hand, cup of coffee resting on his thigh. but he wasn't leaning forward. He wasn't holding the remote. His head was tilted to the side, and his arm hung limply down by the chair. The TV wasn't on. The coffee cup was on the floor, tipped over. I didn't scream at first. I just walked slowly towards him, like my body was moving on its own, and my brain hadn't caught up. My ears were ringing like there was a siren somewhere far away. I kneeled down in front of him, calling out to him softly, but he didn't move. His eyes were half open, staring at nothing. There was spit dried on the side of his mouth, and the skin around his eyes looked sunken and dark. I put my hands on his chest and started pushing, trying to do CPR like they teach you in health class, counting in my head, feeling the stiff resistance under his ribs. I kept pushing until my arms gave out, and I fell forward onto him, crying into his shirt, feeling the coldness through the fabric. I don't remember how long I stayed there like that. Time felt like it stopped existing. The sun kept coming up outside, shining brighter through the windows, but everything felt dark to me. When I finally got up, my knees were shaking so bad I almost fell over. I called 911, but I already knew there was no point. I sat on the couch across from him, staring at the rug patterns and the coffee stains spreading out on the carpet. I didn't want to look at him, but I couldn't look away either. It felt like my soul was trapped there with him, tied down by invisible wires. When the paramedics came and pulled me away, I didn't even fight them. I just stared at the chair as they tried to revive him again, even though I already knew he was gone. After the funeral, life didn't return to normal. There was no normal after that. At night, I started having the same nightmare, over and over again. In the dream, I was waking up just like that morning, walking out of my room, and halfway down the hall, I would suddenly remember what was waiting for me in the living room. That dread would hit me so hard I couldn't breathe. I would scream in the dream, scream like my chest was going to rip apart, and then I would wake up screaming, my sheets soaked with sweat, my whole body shaking. Some nights, I wouldn't even let myself fall asleep. I would sit up all night, staring at the shadows on my walls, afraid to close my eyes, because if I did, I knew I would see it again. I stopped eating much. I stopped talking to people. My friends tried to call, but I ignored them. I didn't want to hear about college or girlfriends or parties, or any of the things they were doing. I felt like I wasn't a part of their world anymore. I was stuck in that living room, kneeling in front of my dad forever. I started seeing things out of the corner of my eyes, shadows that moved when nothing was there. My body felt like it was constantly vibrating, like I had electricity running under my skin. I thought I was losing my mind. My girlfriend, who is now my wife, was the only person who didn't give up on me. She would sit next to me on the couch, even when I wouldn't talk, just resting her head on my shoulder. I think she knew I was afraid of being alone with my own thoughts. She would cook me food and put it in front of me, even if I only took a couple bites. Some nights she would hold me while I cried myself to sleep. But after months of nightmares and no sleep and no peace, my brain finally broke. It happened in the middle of the day. I was sitting on the edge of my bed, staring at my hands, when everything started to spin. My girlfriend was talking to me about going out for groceries, and I could hear her voice, but I couldn't understand the words. My head felt heavy, my chest felt tight, and then my whole body tensed up so hard I thought my bones were going to break. My hands curled into claws and my back arched, and I remember screaming, just screaming like an animal. She told me later I was like that for almost an hour. In my mind, I kept seeing that morning again and again. I was trapped there, waking up, walking down the hall, feeling that dread, and then screaming before I saw him. Over and over. I could hear myself screaming in real life too, like my mind and body were connected in that pain. Finally, after what felt like forever, I let myself go into the living room in my mind. I let myself see him again, his dead body in the chair, the coffee spilled, the silent TV. And something inside me broke apart and then went quiet. When I came out of it, I was on the floor, my girlfriend holding me, crying into my chest. After that, I stopped having the nightmares. They were just gone, like my brain had burned itself out. Years passed, and I joined the army in 2005. I thought maybe I could build myself into someone stronger, someone who wasn't haunted by the past. I went through basic training, then deployed to Iraq. I was leading a convoy one day. The sun was burning so hot it felt like the air itself was cooking us inside our armor. Dust was whipping around in the wind and sticking to the sweat on my face, making it gritty every time I blinked. My ears were ringing from the engine noise, the radio chatter, the constant tension of looking out for IEDs or ambushes. We got intel that terrorists were using kids to stop convoys. They would send a child out into the road, force the trucks to stop, and then attack with RPGs or machine guns. We were told not to stop for anything, to run over anyone in our way to keep the convoy moving. Orders like that burn into your soul. You hear them, you nod, but your mind rebels against it. You tell yourself it's not going to happen to you. But that day a kid ran out onto the road about 300 meters in front of us. I saw him come out from behind a burned-out building, running fast at first, then slowing down, standing right in our path. My hands locked around the steering wheel. I couldn't move. He was wearing this dirty white shirt that flapped around his thin arms in the hot wind. My truck chief was screaming at me to floor it, hitting the dash with his fist. I don't remember making the decision. I just felt my foot push down on the pedal, and the truck lurched forward, engine roaring louder. The boy dove out of the way at the last second, his small body hitting the dirt, rolling in a cloud of dust as we passed. My chest felt like it was full of ice. My hands were shaking so bad on the wheel, I could hardly keep it straight. When we finally reached the next FB, we parked in a line with the other trucks, and my knees were so weak I almost fell climbing out. I walked to the barracks like I was sleepwalking, my body aching from hours of tension. I laid down on my cot, staring at the metal bars of the bunk above me, feeling my mind spin with guilt, fear, relief, and horror all mixed together like a sickness in my stomach. Eventually I drifted into sleep, thinking maybe I'd get a short rest before the next mission. But the nightmare came back. In my dream I was driving again, down the same hot road, engine roaring. The boy ran out in front of me, but this time I didn't freeze. I ran him over. I felt the thump under the wheels, felt the truck bounce slightly. I stopped, heart pounding in my chest like a hammer. I got out and walked around to the back of the truck, my boots sinking into the hot sand. Each step felt like walking through water. I felt dread rising up in my throat like acid, burning the back of my mouth. I reached the back of the truck, expecting to see the boy's crushed body in the dirt. But it wasn't him. It was my father, slumped on the ground, his dead eyes staring at the sun above, his mouth half open like he was trying to speak. The smell of sweat and metal hit me, and I fell to my knees screaming. I screamed so loud my chest felt like it was tearing apart. I could hear myself screaming in real life too, but in the dream I couldn't stop. I screamed and screamed until I woke up. When I woke up I was running, full sprint, my boots pounding against the packed dirt of the FOB. I didn't even remember getting up from my cot. I didn't know where I was going. I looked around, and I was in a part of the base I didn't recognize, empty buildings around me, the sky above turning a pale morning gray. My chest was heaving, sweat pouring down my back, my hands shaking uncontrollably. I bent over and threw up onto the ground, feeling the acid burn my throat. After that, the nightmare stopped. Maybe my brain had finally burned itself out again, like it did all those years ago. But even now, I still live in fear of my own mind. I always thought of myself as a careful person. Even back then, a few years ago, when I was only in my early 20s, living alone in that small rented house on the edge of town, I was always the cautious type. My friends used to tease me about double-checking the locks, peeking out windows before opening the door, making sure my curtains were drawn properly at night. But it never bothered me. I liked knowing I was aware of everything going on around me. I think that's part of why that night still gets under my skin even now. It was a Friday night in early winter. I remember that because I had pulled out the thick fleece blanket from the closet that morning. The house got cold fast once the sun went down, and that day it had been gloomy and gray since the afternoon. I was sitting in the living room, curled up on the worn-out brown couch that came with the rental, the blanket wrapped tight around my legs. I had the TV on, just something to pass the time, some random movie I wasn't even really paying attention to. The living room was dim. I only had one small lamp turned on, the one sitting on the side table next to the couch. It threw a warm yellow glow across the room, leaving the corners dark. I liked it like that, felt cozier. Outside the front window, the street was completely black. There was a street light a little ways down, but it had been out for months, never fixed by the city, and my porch light was off like it always was at night. I didn't like having it on. Part of me felt like it made me a bigger target if anyone was out there looking for houses that seemed easy to approach. My neighborhood wasn't dangerous, but it wasn't exactly friendly either. Mostly quiet, older houses, lots of renters, people kept to themselves. At night, it felt abandoned. I think it was around 9 p.m. when I heard the doorbell. At first, I wasn't even sure what the sound was. It was so sudden and sharp in the quiet house that my brain took a second to process it. The movie was playing softly, so it wasn't loud enough to drown it out. When I realized it was the doorbell, my chest tightened. I remember feeling that cold rush of fear, that quick panic thought. Who would be at my door at this time? No one ever came to visit me unannounced, and especially not at night. I muted the TV and sat frozen for a few seconds. My ears were ringing a little from how fast my heart was pounding. I didn't move at first. I just listened. Everything was silent again. No footsteps on the porch, no sounds of someone shuffling or clearing their throat. I sat there under my blanket, staring at the front door across the living room, feeling like if I just waited, whoever it was would leave. But after almost a minute, curiosity started to overpower fear. Slowly, I slipped the blanket off, setting it down on the couch. I stood up and walked across the room, careful to make my footsteps as light as possible. My house had hardwood floors that creaked if you stepped too hard, and I didn't want whoever was outside to hear me moving around. I reached the door and stood next to it, pressing my back flat against the wall. I felt like my heart was vibrating in my chest, thudding so hard it almost hurt. I didn't want to turn on the porch light. That would make it obvious someone was home, and I didn't know what this person wanted. Maybe it was someone trying to sell something, maybe a neighbor needing help, but at that hour, with no warning, my mind went straight to the worst possibilities. I reached up slowly to the peephole, holding my breath, and leaned forward to look out. At first, I couldn't see anything. It was pitch black outside. The porch was covered, but the light from my living room lamp didn't reach that far. My eyes adjusted after a few seconds, and I started to make out shapes, the shadow of my porch railing, the faint outline of the steps leading down to the walkway. And then I noticed it. At first I thought I was seeing things. There was a shape near the top of the steps, close to where the railing ended. It wasn't shaped like a person exactly, not like any person I'd seen standing there before. It was small, maybe 3 or 4 feet tall, and it was dark. I mean, it was darker than the night around it. I could see it because it blocked out everything behind it, like a solid black shape in the darkness. My brain kept trying to turn it into something logical. Maybe it was a kid wearing a dark coat, maybe it was a dog or something crouched on the steps. But as I kept watching, the shape started to move. It wasn't just standing there. It was moving its arms out to the sides and down again, slowly and gracefully, like it was dancing. The motion was so fluid it made my skin crawl. Its arms, if that's what they were, moved like wings, extending out and dipping down. Then it would bring them in and start again. I felt my stomach twist. I didn't know what I was looking at. I pressed my eye harder against the peephole, squinting to try to see more detail, but the porch was too dark. I could only see the movement and the outline of its small body. Its head seemed rounded, no clear shoulders, and the arms were thin and long compared to its height. It kept doing that same movement over and over, dipping and extending and curling back in. It reminded me of a bird stretching its wings, but somehow it was more human than that, even though it didn't look human. I don't know how long I stood there watching. It felt like forever, but it was probably only 30 seconds or so. My breathing got shallow. I realized I was holding my breath, and I forced myself to inhale quietly through my nose. My throat felt tight, my mouth was dry. I felt trapped, pinned there by fear, but unable to pull away from the peephole. Finally, I couldn't watch it anymore. I stepped back quickly from the door, pressing my hand over my mouth to keep from making any sound. My mind was racing with every terrifying possibility I could think of. Some deformed person trying to lure me outside. A child with something seriously wrong with them. An animal with mange and injuries. I didn't know what was worse, but I knew I didn't want to open that door. I moved away from the door and sat back down on the couch. My legs felt weak and shaky. I pulled the blanket around me again and stared at the muted TV screen, not seeing it. The room felt too dark all of a sudden. I wanted to turn on all the lights, to make the shadows go away, but I was too afraid to move again in case whoever, or whatever, was out there could see me through the windows. I don't know how long I sat there. 5 minutes maybe, or 10. My heart was still beating hard, but the initial rush of fear had faded into a numb, sick feeling in my chest. I felt stupid for not calling someone, but who would I call? The police? And say what? That there was a small dancing shape at my door in the dark? Even as scared as I was, I knew how crazy it would sound. They wouldn't come out for that, and if it really was a kid or a sick animal, I'd feel even worse. Eventually, I decided I needed to check again. I couldn't just sit there all night wondering if it was still there or not. I stood up slowly, feeling my knees pop a little from sitting so tense for so long. I walked back to the door, each step feeling heavy and hesitant. My hand was trembling as I reached up to the peephole again. This time, there was nothing there. The porch looked empty, just dark and quiet like normal. I waited, watching carefully, thinking maybe it was hiding to the side. Maybe it would jump back into view, but it never did. After a full minute of staring out and seeing only the shadows of the railing and steps, I stepped back. I didn't feel any better. In a way, it felt worse. At least when I could see it, I knew where it was. The rest of the night passed in a blur. I sat on the couch, blanket pulled up to my chin, the TV still muted, listening to every little creak and groan of the house. My ears felt sharp, picking up on noises I usually ignored. The ticking of the kitchen clock, the faint hum of the fridge, the branches of the tree outside scraping against the siding when the wind moved them. Every sound made me flinch. I didn't sleep that night. I stayed up until the sun came up, sitting there in the living room, my eyes burning with exhaustion, too afraid to go into my bedroom in the back of the house. As soon as it was light outside, I finally stood up and went to the door. I turned on the porch light, opened the door slowly, and stepped out. Everything looked normal. The porch was empty. There were no marks on the steps, nothing out of place. I walked down to the walkway, glancing up and down the street. The houses were quiet. No one else was outside yet. I even looked in the dirt next to the steps for footprints or paw prints, but there was nothing. No sign at all that anyone had been there. I went back inside, locked the door again, and just stood there for a while, staring at the wood grain of the door. I felt tired to my bones, my head heavy with lack of sleep, but my mind was still buzzing with fear. I didn't tell anyone about it for a long time. Even now, I haven't told many people. It sounds ridiculous when I say it out loud. A small dancing figure at my door in the middle of the night. But I know what I saw. I remember how it moved, the way it dipped and spread its arms like wings, how it stood there in the darkness without making a sound. For weeks after that, every time the doorbell rang, I froze. Even in daylight. Even if I was expecting a package or a friend. That feeling never really went away. I started leaving the porch light on at night for a while, just in case, but I hated it. I felt exposed, like it was an invitation for anyone to come up to my door and see inside. Eventually, I moved out of that house. Not because of that night, at least not directly, but I think part of me was relieved to leave it behind. To leave the memory of that night in that living room, in that dark porch with the broken streetlight. But even now, in my new place, I still pause before opening the door. I still peek out the window before I turn on the porch light. And sometimes, when it's late at night and everything is quiet, I think about that small black figure, moving its arms like wings, dancing alone in the dark, and I feel that same cold fear spreading in my chest. I never found out what it was. I don't think I ever will. Part of me does. I never really thought about how vulnerable I was until that night. I mean, I always knew it somewhere in the back of my mind, but it wasn't something I thought about daily. I lived with 5 Navy guys in this big old house, but my room wasn't in the main house. It was out in the detached garage. When I first moved in, I thought it was cool. I liked having my own space. The garage had been converted into a bedroom before I moved in, so it wasn't like I was sleeping next to oil stains and boxes. It was finished with carpet and drywall. It had a closet and a decent-sized window, and it was bigger than any bedroom I'd had before. I didn't have to worry about waking anyone up with my alarm early in the morning or bothering anyone if I stayed up late watching videos. It felt like my own little apartment, and I liked that. My bed was tucked against the far wall, across from the door, so when I laid there I could see the door if I wanted to. There was a small pathway at the foot of my bed leading to the door, with my closet on the right side. I had blackout blinds on the window, and at night, it was pitch dark unless the motion light outside came on. I had a cheap dresser against the wall next to the bed, a metal flashlight on top of it, and my phone charger plugged in next to my pillow. My dog, a big black lab, usually slept at the end of my bed, sprawled out, snoring softly, completely dead to the world. That day had been normal. I'd gone to work early in the morning, came home in the evening, cooked some dinner inside the main house. chatted with a couple of the guys about some stupid YouTube video one of them was obsessed with, and then went back out to my room around 10. I scrolled Reddit for a while, read some threads about crime stories and break-ins, laughed at some dumb memes, and then finally forced myself to put my phone down so I could sleep. I remember thinking about a story I read, where someone said they always locked their doors after reading about how burglars often test houses with unlocked doors first. For some reason, that stuck with me. Before that, I used to just pull the door shut and call it good, but about a week before this night, I started deadbolting it every single time. I don't know why it took me so long to do that. It felt like overkill for this quiet neighborhood, but still, it was a habit now. That night, I remember having some weird dream. I don't remember what it was about, but I remember the rattling sound starting in the middle of it. At first, it was part of the dream, like maybe I was at a gas station and someone was trying to get into their car, or there was a cart rattling on pavement. But the noise didn't stop. Even in the dream, it kept going, this harsh, vibrating metallic rattle, over and over, like metal grinding against metal, but with a sharp clacking underneath it. It got louder and louder, and my dream started falling apart. My thoughts went foggy, and I felt this heavy weight all over me as I started to wake up. I opened my eyes halfway. Everything felt fuzzy. My head was heavy and thick. I could hear my own heartbeat in my ears, and that rattling noise was still there. For a second, I didn't understand what I was hearing. I thought maybe something fell over, or my dog was scratching himself against the door or something like that. But as I started to wake up more, the rattling got sharper, more aggressive. My dog was awake too. He wasn't making any noise, just staring at the door, his ears stiff and his head tilted low. He never woke up during the night. Not for thunder, not for cars driving by, not for anything. The rattling continued, almost vibrating through the air. I was wide awake by then, though my body still felt numb with sleep. I could hear the metal clinking and clattering, like someone was shaking the door handle violently, almost like someone was pounding on it too, but I couldn't tell. I just knew it wasn't wind. The door was only 3 feet away from the end of my bed. In the dark, I could see the outline of it, just a tall black shape with the faintest strip of gray at the bottom where it didn't seal against the floor. I laid there, my eyes locked on the door handle. It was shaking back and forth, so hard I could see the faint glint of metal moving. I felt frozen. My hands were trembling, and my chest was tight. I wanted to yell, to scream, to call someone, but my throat felt like it was closed off. My mind was racing, but my body wouldn't respond. I kept thinking, this isn't real. I must still be dreaming. There's no way this is real. But the noise didn't stop. It kept rattling, scraping, shaking the door in its frame. My dog stood up slowly, his tail low, ears pinned back, staring at the door with wide eyes. He didn't bark. He didn't even growl. He just stared, and that scared me more than if he had been barking his head off. It felt like he was afraid too. My breathing was shallow and fast. I felt like my chest was being crushed under something heavy. My hands found my flashlight on the dresser. I gripped it so hard my knuckles hurt, but I couldn't get up. I just laid there, under the blanket, my knees pulled up to my chest, the flashlight pressed against my collarbone, and my other hand clamped over my mouth so I wouldn't make a noise. I kept thinking, this is it. This is how I die. I'm alone out here, separated from the house, and whoever it is knows I'm alone. I could see the motion light was on, shining through the tiny cracks in the blinds in my closet window. I tried to listen for footsteps, voices, anything, but all I could hear was the rattling and my dog's quick breathing. I felt tears sliding down my temples into my hair, but I couldn't move. My chest was shaking from how fast my heart was going, and my stomach felt like it was full of wet cement. Then, as suddenly as it started, the rattling stopped. The silence slammed into me so hard it felt deafening. I lay there, frozen, still gripping the flashlight so tight my fingers were numb. The quiet pressed against my ears. My dog stood completely still, staring at the door, his nose twitching as he sniffed the air. I couldn't tell how long I laid there before I finally moved. My muscles ached and burned from how tense they had been. I slid off the bed slowly, keeping low to the ground. My knees felt weak, like they were going to buckle under me, but I forced myself to crawl towards my closet. I pulled open the door just enough to squeeze in. My closet was weird. It had a bench built in underneath the window, almost like it was meant to be a reading nook, though it was too narrow to sit comfortably. I crawled up onto it and pushed myself up to look out the window through a tiny gap between the blinds and the frame. The motion light was still on, illuminating the cracked driveway and a strip of the backyard, but I didn't see anyone. My eyes darted around, trying to catch any movement, but there was nothing. Just the empty yard, the silent driveway, my dog's dark shape sitting on the carpet. After a few seconds, the light clicked off, plunging everything back into darkness. My eyes strained against it, but I saw nothing else. I slid back down off the bench and sat in my closet for a long time, knees pulled to my chest, flashlight resting against my shin. My breathing felt like I was running a marathon, and I couldn't calm down. Every tiny noise made my whole body flinch. The tick of the wall clock, the faint hum of the fridge out in the garage nook, the tiny creaks of the walls settling. I felt like I was going to be sick. Eventually, I crawled back out and sat on my bed. I turned on my phone screen and saw it was 2:30 in the morning. My fingers shook so bad I almost dropped the phone. I kept thinking logically, trying to calm myself down. I lived with 5 Navy guys. They often went out downtown, drank too much, came home at random hours, and brought friends back. I kept telling myself, it's just one of them. Maybe they were so drunk they didn't realize they were at the wrong door. Maybe it was someone they brought home, some idiot thinking the garage was the way in. I tried to make it make sense in my head, because if I didn't, I was going to lose my mind. I typed out a text to the group chat. My hands were trembling, so hard I kept mistyping. Finally I wrote, "Hey guys, are you up? Do you have people over?" Someone was just outside my door trying to get in. I assumed someone must be drunk or something. Kinda creepy. I tried to make it sound casual, like I wasn't terrified out of my mind, but my heart was pounding so hard I thought I might pass out. Less than 2 minutes later, I heard the back door to the house swing open. The wooden frame creaked loud enough that I heard it even from the garage. Then I heard whistling and the faint thud of footsteps running across the gravel. My dog lifted his head again, ears perked forward. I heard voices shouting, but I couldn't make out the words. Then I heard a loud clanging noise, like someone hitting metal against something, and I realized they had grabbed the baseball bats they kept by the back door. I sat there frozen, listening to them running around outside, the bats clacking against each other, their shoes crunching the gravel and the grass. My dog whined quietly, his tail thumping once against the blanket. After a few minutes, I heard a knock on the door to the garage, and one of them calling my name. I stood up on shaky legs and opened the door. The cold night air rushed in, and I felt the goosebumps rise all over my arms and neck. They were all standing there, 2 of them holding baseball bats, one holding a flashlight, another one in bare feet shivering in his gym shorts. Their faces were tense, eyes darting around the yard. I stepped out with my dog, who stayed pressed against my leg. One of them asked me if I saw anyone, and I just shook my head. My voice wouldn't come out. They told me to go inside the house, so I did, walking quickly across the gravel driveway, feeling every tiny stone biting into the bottoms of my feet through my thin socks. Inside, it felt warm and safe, but I still couldn't stop shaking. My dog stayed glued to my leg, his head pressed against my knee. I sat on the couch while they searched the yard and the garage. They didn't find anyone, but they found a pack of cigarettes lying by the corner of the garage, and an empty bag from Hardee's or something like that. The food bag was crumpled up with grease stains all over it. I woke up that morning feeling excited. My dad had told me the night before that we were going ice fishing. It was midwinter, and the snow had come down heavy all night. I remember looking out the window before we left. The sky still dark but glowing orange near the horizon, with the porch light shining across the thick blanket of snow. The air outside was biting cold. I could feel it sink through my jacket as soon as we stepped off the porch. My boots crunched through the powder with every step down the driveway. Dad loaded our rods and the little sled with bait, hooks, and a propane heater to keep warm in the ice house. I kept my gloved hands in my pockets as we walked. I remember the way my breath came out in long white streams, each one quickly fading into the still air around us. We drove for maybe 20 minutes to the lake. When we got there, the sun was just coming up, pale and weak behind thin clouds. The lake looked flat and silent, with snow covering it in a soft sheet, so it didn't even look like water. Just a flat white plain stretching out to the far bank, lined with bare trees. A few ice houses were scattered out there, dark blocks sitting alone on the empty frozen lake. Dad parked the truck close to shore, and we got out. I pulled my hood up against the wind as we walked to the sled. Dad hooked a rope over his shoulder and started pulling. I walked behind him, my boots leaving small, deep prints in the snow. I could hear the ice creaking under us as we got farther out, a long groaning sound that seemed to come from deep below. It always scared me a little, hearing the ice groan like that, but Dad told me it was normal. The ice was just settling with the cold, he said. We kept walking toward our ice house, the one Dad had set up the week before. He liked fishing in the same spot each year because he knew where the deep pockets were. The snow that morning covered everything. You couldn't see where other people had drilled holes before. You couldn't see the small, uneven dips in the ice. It all looked like one flat white sheet. I remember looking down and thinking how clean it looked, like the untouched snow in our backyard after a storm, before anyone walked across it. I was about 10 then. I wasn't thinking about danger or being careful. I just kept following Dad, my boots squeaking against the packed snow under each step. I watched his back as he walked, the way his thick brown jacket shifted with each pull of the sled, the rope tight across his shoulder, his head down against the wind. It felt peaceful out there in the early morning. I could hear the ice crack sometimes under my feet, just quick, sharp sounds that echoed across the lake, and I could hear the sled dragging along behind him. Otherwise, it was silent. I took another step forward, looking around at the ice houses in the distance. That was when everything changed in a single moment. I felt the ice give way under me. It didn't crack loud like the normal ice groans. It just gave out like rotten wood. One second I was looking ahead at Dad's back, and the next I was falling. I didn't even have time to yell or react. My feet went through, then my legs, then my waist, and suddenly I was under the ice-cold water. The shock of it was instant and brutal. I gasped as I went in, my mouth filling with freezing water that tasted like mud and iron. My jacket ballooned around me. My boots felt like they turned to stone, dragging me down. I opened my eyes in the water. Everything was cloudy and gray-blue, with flakes of ice and tiny air bubbles swirling around me. I saw the hole above me, the ragged black opening in the white snow. But I didn't move. For a second, I just sank. My body shut down. The cold was so strong it didn't even feel like cold at first. It felt like my skin and muscles and bones were being crushed from all sides. I couldn't feel my arms. I couldn't feel my legs. My chest burned, and I remember thinking that I had to get back up, but my body wouldn't do it. It just kept sinking. Time slowed down there. It felt like I was under for minutes, even though later Dad told me it was only a few seconds. I could see the hole above me, the circle of light surrounded by darkness, with the edges lined in white snow and broken thin ice. I remember thinking about how far away it looked even though it was only a few feet. My arms moved, but they were slow and heavy, like they belonged to someone else. My chest started to burn more, and my mouth hurt from the cold water. I saw bubbles come out of my nose, drifting up past my eyes toward the hole. Somewhere inside, I forced myself to move. It wasn't a clear thought. It was just fear and survival mixed together. My arms reached up, my fingers numb, and I kicked with my boots even though they felt like they weighed 100 pounds each. I could feel the laces pulling at my ankles, like they might rip off. I kicked again, and my hand broke the surface, grabbing at snow and broken ice. The cold air felt like fire in my lungs when my face came up. I tried to breathe, but I coughed out lake water instead. My arms felt like rubber, but I clawed at the edge of the hole, trying to find something to hold on to. The thin ice kept breaking under my hands, chunks of it falling away into the water around me. I remember looking up and seeing Dad's face. His eyes were wide, and his mouth was open as he dropped the sled rope and turned back to me. I couldn't hear anything, just the pounding of my heart and the rush of blood in my ears. I kept trying to pull myself up, but I was so tired already. My hands couldn't grip anything. The cold was sinking deeper into my bones. My chest was tight, and my skin burned from the icy water, soaking through all my clothes. My legs kept kicking, but I couldn't feel them anymore. Just a dull ache somewhere below me. I saw Dad's boots come right up to the edge. Then his hands were under my arms, grabbing my soaked jacket and pulling hard. My chest scraped against the edge of the ice as he pulled. It felt like knives digging into my ribs, but I didn't care. He kept pulling, dragging me up onto the surface, my legs coming out last with water pouring off them. I lay on my stomach on the snow, gasping, my arms shaking so hard I couldn't hold myself up. Water ran down my face and dripped off my chin, freezing on the snow below me. My hair was soaked and stuck to my forehead. My jacket was heavy and dripping. I could feel the water already freezing on the outside of it. My pants clung to my legs, and my boots felt tighter as the laces froze solid. I lay there for what felt like forever, just breathing, feeling the air burn in my throat. Dad crouched next to me, his hand on my back. I could hear him breathing hard too. My body was shaking so bad my teeth clacked together. I didn't want to move. I just wanted to lay there, even though the wind was freezing against my wet clothes. Dad finally got me to sit up. My arms felt weak and heavy. My gloves were soaked and frozen stiff. I couldn't feel my fingers at all. He pulled me to my feet. I swayed a little, but he kept a tight grip on my arm. He didn't say anything. He just grabbed the sled rope and turned us back toward shore. We didn't go to the ice house that morning. We didn't fish. We just walked back to the truck. I remember the feeling of each step, how my boots felt like blocks of ice, how my jeans froze solid around my knees and made it hard to bend my legs. Dad held onto my arm the whole way back, his grip tight and warm even through my soaked jacket. I kept my eyes on the truck, just focusing on getting there. Each step felt like it took all my strength. When we finally got to the truck, Dad opened the door and helped me climb in. The heater was on full blast, and I sat there shivering so hard my shoulders hurt. My teeth wouldn't stop chattering. Water dripped off my jacket and pants onto the rubber mats under my boots. I felt sick from the cold, like I might throw up. Dad started the engine and turned the heat up even more. He didn't say anything for a while. He just looked out the windshield at the lake. I could see his breath in the cab, coming out in short, heavy puffs. After a few minutes, he pulled off my gloves and wrapped my hands in an old blanket we kept behind the seat. My fingers were red and burning as they started to warm up. It hurt so bad it made me cry. I sat there with tears running down my face, mixing with the water dripping from my hair. I didn't sob or make noise. I just sat there silently, feeling the heat come back into my hands like pins and needles, feeling the tears run down my cheeks and drop onto the blanket in my lap. We drove home after that. The ride felt long and silent. I just sat there in my soaked clothes, wrapped in the blanket, staring out the window as the snowy fields went by. I felt tired, so tired I could barely keep my eyes open. My chest still hurt from gasping in the freezing water. My skin burned all over where the cold had bitten deep into it. My legs ached from kicking under the ice. I didn't think about what could have happened. I didn't think about how close it was. I just felt empty and cold and tired. When we got home, Dad helped me inside. Mom was in the kitchen, and she turned around when she saw us. Her eyes went wide, and she came running over, her hands grabbing my shoulders, feeling my wet jacket, feeling how cold I was. She started pulling off my clothes right there in the kitchen, her hands working fast to get me out of the frozen jeans and heavy boots. She wrapped me in towels and sat me down by the heater vent in the living room. I sat there shivering with towels wrapped around my shoulders and another one around my head, feeling the warm air blowing across my bare arms. My skin turned bright red as it warmed up, like a burn rising out of the cold. That day stuck with me. Even now, years later, I still think about that moment under the ice. How quiet it was down there. How peaceful it looked, the way the light came through the hole, all muted and cloudy. How my body just gave up at first, sinking down like a stone because of the shock. How I could see the surface but couldn't get there until something inside finally kicked in and forced me to move. I think about how close it was to being the end. Just a few more seconds, if I hadn't pushed up, if Dad hadn't been there to pull me out. I was about 4 or 5 years old when this happened. At that age, I didn't really understand much about what was going on with my parents. I just knew things felt different. My mom and dad had just separated. My dad was still living in the house I grew up in, and my mom had moved into this small 2-bedroom apartment not too far away. Even though I had my own room there, painted soft blue with a few of my stuffed animals lined up along the pillow, I never really wanted to sleep in it. I always ended up sleeping in my mom's bed. Her room felt warmer, safer, smelled like her shampoo, like lavender, and that faint clean smell from her night cream. It was just better being close to her. After all, my whole world was changing, and it felt like the only way to hold on to something. The apartment itself was on the first floor. When you walked in, there was a short hallway that led into the living room and small kitchen. Past the living room was another hallway that branched off to the 2 bedrooms and bathroom. Our 2 rooms were at the very end of that hall, directly across from each other. If you stood in one doorway, you could look straight into the other room. The carpet was rough beige with a few flattened spots near the doors, and the walls were painted white with some scrapes around the baseboards. My mom didn't hang many pictures because she said we wouldn't be there long, that it was just temporary until we figured things out. It was summer, and even though the apartment had these old rattly window AC units, it still felt hot and sticky at night. My mom usually opened her window behind the bed before we fell asleep. The window was just above the headboard, and if you laid there looking up, you could see the dark screen shaking a little with the breeze. Sometimes you could hear crickets or people talking if they walked by on the sidewalk outside. I remember liking that window open because it felt like the night air made it easier to breathe, like I wasn't trapped inside when everything else felt so closed off lately. That night felt normal. I don't remember what we did that day. Maybe she took me to the little playground down the street, or we went to the grocery store. I just remember her giving me a bath in the small yellow tub and letting me choose one of my oversized t-shirts to sleep in. She brushed my hair until it was smooth, tucked me into bed with her, and left a small night light plugged in across the room. It was shaped like a tiny house and glowed soft yellow. The shadows it made on the walls always looked like tree branches to me. I woke up sometime in the middle of the night. The apartment was silent except for the sound of the ceiling fan turning above us and the soft noise of cars far away. For some reason, I sat up in bed, feeling like something was wrong. My mom was sleeping next to me, breathing slow and deep. I rubbed my eyes and looked around, just scanning the dark room and the doorway. That's when I saw our cat. He was a big gray tabby with white paws, and he always slept at our feet, curled into a ball. But this time, he wasn't in bed with us. He was sitting right in the door frame of my mom's room, just staring into my bedroom across the hall. I remember feeling confused more than scared. It was strange for him to be out there alone. His ears were perked up, and his tail was twitching slightly behind him. He sat there so still that at first I thought maybe I was dreaming. But then he stood up and quietly padded into my bedroom. Before he disappeared from my view, he turned his head back toward me and meowed. It was a small sound, but it echoed weirdly down the hall, like everything was extra quiet, so that meow just stayed in the air. I turned to my mom, reaching out to touch her arm. I wanted to tell her about the cat, about how he was acting weird. It only took a few seconds for her to wake up. I didn't even finish nudging her before she opened her eyes, blinking at me with a tired, worried face. As I turned back to point at the doorway, everything felt like it was happening in slow motion. There was a shadow there that hadn't been before. My eyes focused and I saw him. A man, standing right in the doorway of my bedroom, facing us, just for a second before he turned and walked out toward the living room. At that age, I didn't really understand fear the way adults do. It wasn't just fear. It was like every part of my body went empty, like my insides disappeared. I couldn't even make a noise. My mom saw him too. Her whole body stiffened. Then she moved so fast I didn't even understand what was happening. She grabbed me under my arms and lifted me straight up, turning toward the window above the bed. She shoved the screen out with her elbow and pushed me through the window. I felt the cold metal frame scrape my leg before I landed on the grass outside with a thud. It wasn't that far of a drop, only a few feet, but it shocked me so bad that for a moment I just sat there on the cool, wet grass, staring up at the window in confusion. Then she climbed out after me. Her nightgown snagged on the window latch for a second before ripping free. She grabbed my hand and pulled me to stand up. That's when I started crying, the tears just falling out of me without sound at first. She pulled me close to her chest, her breathing so hard and ragged that I could hear her heart pounding through her ribs. Then she started screaming. It was so loud it hurt my ears. She was yelling for help, yelling that someone was in the house, over and over again. Her voice bounced off the apartment buildings around us, and lights started turning on in the windows. Someone upstairs opened their window and asked what was happening. I don't remember her words exactly, but I remember the way she sounded, like every scream was tearing her throat open. It felt like forever before the police came. 2 cars pulled up with their lights flashing bright red and blue against the walls. Neighbors started coming outside, standing around in their robes and pajamas. Someone gave my mom a blanket to wrap around her shoulders because she was shaking so bad. One of the officers talked to her while the other one walked through our apartment, shining his flashlight around. I sat on the grass next to my mom's bare feet, hugging my knees, feeling cold and sweaty at the same time. I just kept staring at that window we climbed out of, the screen laying bent on the ground under it. When the officer came back out, He said they didn't see any signs of forced entry. The front door was unlocked, though, and they guessed that whoever it was must have left that way. My mom kept insisting that she locked it. She said she always locked it, the deadbolt and the chain lock too. She kept repeating herself, her voice getting smaller each time until she just stopped talking completely. They asked her a few more questions, then they left after telling her to call if anything else happened. I remember the neighbors watching us as we went back inside, their faces pale in the flashing lights of the police cars. That night we didn't sleep. My mom sat up in bed with me wrapped in her arms, rocking me back and forth while the sun came up. The cat eventually came back into the room and jumped up on the bed. He curled up in my lap like he always did, purring softly, but I couldn't stop shaking every time I thought about how he had acted before. Like he knew, like he saw something before we did. The next week felt long and strange. My mom was quiet. She called my dad, and I went to stay with him for a few days. When I came back, she was cleaning everything. She vacuumed all the carpets, wiped down all the counters, cleaned the windows, rearranged the furniture. One day she was in the kitchen, wiping down the outside of the cupboards, and she opened the little closet where the water heater was kept. I was sitting at the small table coloring in a book. I heard her gasp, a small sharp noise that made me look up. She crouched down and reached into the darkness of that closet. When she stood back up, she was holding something. It was a notebook, just a thin spiral one with a blue cover. She opened it, and I could see there were pages with writing and little drawings. I didn't understand what I was looking at, but I remember the way her hands started to shake as she flipped through it. Her face looked pale and tight, like her skin was too small. Then she reached back into the closet and pulled out something else, a pair of dark gloves and some empty gum wrappers. I could smell the gloves from where I was sitting, like old rubber mixed with sweat. She called the police again, and they came back, 2 different officers this time. They took the notebook and gloves, asked her a lot of questions. I remember sitting on the couch holding my cat, watching them walk around the apartment with serious faces. They told my mom that it looked like someone might have been hiding in there, that maybe he had been in the apartment for a while before we saw him. I didn't understand what that meant at the time, but as I got older I realized what it really was. He might have been watching us for days, hiding in closets, crawling out when we were gone or asleep, listening to us. The police couldn't do anything else. They didn't find fingerprints that matched anyone. They just told my mom to change the locks and stay alert. After that, she wouldn't let me stay in my own room anymore, even for naps. She started sleeping with a hammer under her pillow, and she bought a thick wooden rod to wedge under the door handle at night. For weeks she jumped every time someone knocked on the door, and she kept the curtains closed all day. I wasn't allowed to open the windows anymore. That summer felt like it never ended. The heat stayed trapped inside the apartment, making the air heavy and stale. Every night I lay in bed next to her, staring at the dark window, trying not to imagine a face staring back in through the glass. We moved out a few months later, back in with my grandparents for a while until she found a different place. Even now as an adult, I still think about that night. About the way my cat meowed before walking into my room. About how quickly my mom moved to get us out. About how that man was standing in my doorway, making his way out of my bedroom like he had been there the whole time. I think about the notebook she found with the drawings and names inside. I don't know what they meant. I don't think I ever want to know. What I do know is that my mom saved my life that night. I still don't know how she did it so fast, how she had the strength to throw me out the window and follow right behind. But she did. And because of I woke up before the sun came up that day. My alarm didn't even go off yet, but I just couldn't sleep anymore. I was supposed to leave for work at 7, but it was only 4. I lay there staring at the ceiling fan spinning slowly above me. It clicked a little each time it turned. I didn't feel tired, just restless. I sat up and rubbed my eyes for a while, then got out of bed and stretched. My room was quiet except for that clicking fan and the hum of the small fridge I kept by the closet. I walked to the window and looked outside. The streetlights were still on, and the road was empty. Sometimes there would be early walkers or runners passing by, but today there was no one. I stood there for a minute, then decided I would just get up and go out for a drive. Maybe grab some breakfast from somewhere and kill time before work. I pulled on some sweatpants and a hoodie, grabbed my keys and wallet from the little table by the door, and stepped out. The air was cool and smelled fresh. I walked to my car, an old black Corolla, and sat inside for a while. The windows were foggy. I turned on the engine and let it idle to warm up. My hands were cold on the steering wheel. After a minute, I pulled out of the driveway and started driving down the empty street. The traffic lights blinked yellow at every crossing. I didn't really have a destination in mind. I just wanted to move. I drove to the outskirts of town where there were barely any houses, just fields and empty lots. There was a small old diner on the edge of the highway that opened at 5. I knew it because I used to go there sometimes when I worked night shifts. I pulled into their parking lot and saw that it was still dark inside. It was only 4:30. I decided to wait. I turned off my car and leaned back in my seat, watching the first hints of morning light coming up on the horizon. The sky turned from black to dark blue with a hint of orange near the ground. After a while, I saw a small car pull in next to mine. It was the owner, a short old man with a large stomach. He unlocked the door and went inside to turn on the lights. I waited 10 more minutes before I went in. The smell of coffee and fried eggs filled the place. I sat at a booth by the window and watched the empty highway while I ate. I ordered black coffee, 2 eggs sunny side up, some hash browns, and toast. It tasted normal, nothing amazing, but it felt good to eat a hot breakfast so early. After I finished, I paid and walked back to my car. It was only 5:30 when I got back on the road. I still had an hour and a half before work. Instead of driving back home, I decided to keep going down the highway. I thought maybe I'd go see the river. There was a small park by the river about 15 minutes away. I hadn't been there in months. When I got to the parking lot of the park, there was only one other car, an old silver SUV with faded paint. I parked a few spots away and got out. The sky was brightening, but the sun hadn't come up yet. The park was quiet and peaceful. I could hear birds starting to chirp in the trees. There was a small dirt path leading down to the riverbank, and I started walking down it. The dirt was still damp from dew, and the grass brushed against my shoes. I could see the river through the trees, calm and dark with a thin layer of mist floating on top. It looked beautiful and cold. I walked slowly, listening to the soft sounds of the morning. After a few minutes, I reached the edge of the river. There was a small wooden bench there, so I sat down. My breath came out in little white clouds in front of me. I sat there for a long time, just thinking about nothing, watching the water flow. I didn't even check my phone. Then I heard a rustling behind me. I thought maybe it was a rabbit or a bird. I didn't look back at first, but the sound kept going. Dry leaves crunching, branches bending. It sounded too heavy for a small animal. I turned my head and looked over my shoulder, but didn't see anything at first. Just trees and bushes. Then I saw movement about 20 feet away, in the thick bushes near the path. I squinted, trying to see what it was. The light was still dim under the trees. I saw the bushes move again, like someone pushing through them. I felt my stomach tighten. I stood up slowly. The rustling stopped. I stared at the spot, waiting to see if it moved again. Nothing happened for a while. I stood there, frozen, feeling my heart beating in my chest. After a minute, I started to walk back up the path towards the parking lot. I didn't hear anything behind me. I walked faster. The trees felt darker and thicker around me. I kept looking over my shoulder, but didn't see anything. I tried to calm myself down. Probably just a deer, I told myself. There were always deer around here. When I reached the parking lot, I saw the silver SUV was still there, but now the driver door was open. I didn't see anyone inside. The lot was empty and silent. I slowed down, looking around. My car was about 30 feet away. I kept walking towards it, but I felt like I was being watched. The feeling was strong, like a hand pressing down on my back. I glanced around, but didn't see anyone. I got into my car quickly and locked the doors. My heart was beating fast. I started the engine and sat there for a moment, looking at the open door of the SUV. The sun was finally coming up, casting long shadows across the lot. I didn't want to sit there anymore. I put the car in reverse and backed out, then drove away. As I pulled onto the highway, I kept checking my mirrors. I couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong. I felt like I was being followed, even though the road behind me was empty. I drove straight to work and parked in my usual spot. I sat there for a while before going in. My hands were shaking on the steering wheel. The whole day at work I felt distracted. I kept thinking about that sound in the bushes and the open door of that SUV. I didn't know why it bothered me so much, but it did. I kept imagining someone hiding in those trees, watching me. I thought about the owner of the SUV. Where were they? Maybe they went for a walk in the park, I told myself. But something felt off about it. When my shift ended, it was already dark outside. I walked to my car quickly, looking around the parking lot. There were other people leaving too, so I felt safer. I drove home with my doors locked and windows up. I kept checking my mirrors every few minutes. That night I couldn't sleep again. I kept hearing that rustling sound in my head. I lay in bed staring at the ceiling, listening to the quiet hum of the fridge and the clicking fan. Every creak of the building made me jump a little. I kept thinking about how close those bushes were, how easy it would be for someone to hide there without anyone knowing. I got up around 2 a.m. and went to the kitchen to drink some water. I stood by the window and looked outside. The street was empty again, the same blinking yellow traffic lights down the road. Then I saw a shadow move across my yard. I froze. It was quick, moving from one side of the yard to the other, disappearing behind the corner of the building. I stood there staring into the dark, trying to see where it went. I felt my whole body shaking. I didn't know what to do. I turned off the kitchen light so I could see better outside. I pressed my face close to the window and looked around the yard. Nothing moved. The trees were still. I stayed there for almost 10 minutes, barely breathing. Finally, I stepped away from the window and sat down at the table. My chest felt tight and my mouth was dry. I didn't want to call the police because what would I tell them? That I saw a shadow. They wouldn't do anything about that. I sat there until my legs stopped shaking. Then I went back to my room and locked the door. I didn't sleep for the rest of the night. I lay there listening to every little sound. When morning finally came, I got up and got ready for work. I felt like a zombie walking around. My eyes burned from lack of sleep. At work I kept thinking about that shadow. Maybe it was a stray cat, I told myself, or a raccoon. But deep down I didn't believe it. That evening, I went straight home after work. I kept the lights off when I walked in so no one could see me clearly through the windows. I locked every door and window in the house, then sat in the living room with the TV on low volume. I didn't even watch it. I just stared at the screen, listening for any sound outside. Around 9 p.m. I heard a car engine outside. I went to the window and peeked through the curtain. There was an old silver SUV parked across the street, facing my house. My stomach dropped when I saw it. It was the same SUV from the park. The headlights were off, and the windows were dark. I couldn't see if anyone was inside. I stood there staring at it, my breath coming out shaky. It stayed there for almost 20 minutes, just parked without moving. I kept watching, not even blinking. Finally, the engine started again, and it pulled away slowly, turning down the road and disappearing into the dark. I backed away from the window and sat on the floor, feeling like my chest was about to explode. My hands were shaking so badly, I had to press them against my knees to keep them still. I didn't sleep at all that night either. Every time a car passed outside, I thought it was the SUV coming back. Every creak of the house made my heart jump. The next day I called in sick to work. I just couldn't leave the house. I sat on the couch with all the lights off, holding a kitchen knife in my lap, waiting for something to happen. But nothing did. By the time evening came, I felt numb. My phone buzzed with messages from work asking if I was okay. I didn't reply. I just sat there in the dark, listening. Around midnight, I heard footsteps on the gravel outside my window. Slow, careful footsteps. I stood up and pressed my ear to the wall, trying to hear better. The steps moved along the side of my house, crunching the gravel under them. Then I heard my trash cans rattling. I peeked through the curtain but couldn't see anything. I stood there for a long time. The noise stopped, and everything went silent again. I sat back down but didn't let go of the knife. My hands hurt from gripping it so tightly. I woke up before sunrise that morning, feeling tired but restless. I had spent the last few days off work, just staying at home, doing nothing. My head felt heavy with all the thoughts that came and went. I decided to go out for a walk to clear my mind. It was still dark outside, but the sky was getting lighter slowly. The streets were empty, and there was a bit of chill in the air. I walked past houses with their porch lights on, quiet cars parked in driveways, and a couple of cats sitting near the garbage bins, staring at me as I walked by. I didn't have a set destination. I just kept walking, listening to my own footsteps echoing on the footpath. The cold breeze made my hands go numb, but I didn't care. I liked the feeling of being outside while everyone else was still asleep. After about 30 minutes of walking, I reached the edge of my neighborhood. There was a road that led out to the highway, and before the highway, there was a small dirt trail going down into a patch of woods. I had never gone down that trail before. I had seen it many times while driving past, but it never interested me. That morning, I stood there looking down the trail for a while. Something about the silent, dark opening between the trees felt peaceful. I decided to walk down and see where it led. As I stepped off the road and onto the dirt, the ground felt colder under my shoes. The trail was narrow, surrounded by bushes and small trees on both sides. The further I went, the darker it got. I could hear my feet crushing dead leaves and twigs with each step. The smell of damp earth and old wood filled my nose. I could hear birds waking up somewhere deep in the woods, but near me, everything was quiet. I walked for about 15 minutes, and the trail opened up a little. There was an old metal fence on the left, half bent and rusted, with parts of it hidden under overgrown grass and vines. Beyond the fence was a huge empty field with dry grass waving gently in the morning wind. I stopped and looked around. I didn't know how far this trail went. I had no phone on me, no bag, nothing, just myself in a hoodie and sweatpants. The trail continued down into thicker woods. I could hear something moving far away, maybe a deer or a wild dog. I kept walking, moving slower now. The trees were taller here, their branches tangled above me, blocking out most of the early sunlight. I felt a shiver run through my body, but I ignored it and kept going. I don't know why I felt so curious that morning. Maybe it was boredom, or maybe I just wanted to do something different. As I walked further, I noticed something strange. On the right side of the trail, there was a small clearing, and in that clearing stood a single wooden chair. It was old, dark brown, and one of its legs was broken, so it leaned to the side. I stopped and looked at it for a while. It felt so out of place. There was no reason for a chair to be sitting alone in the middle of a forest. I walked closer to it, stepping off the trail and onto the wet grass. The chair was covered in dirt and spider webs. Its seat had a crack running down the middle. I looked around to see if there was anything else there, but it was just the chair, surrounded by fallen branches and rocks. I didn't want to touch it. It felt wrong somehow, like it didn't belong there, or I didn't belong near it. I turned back to the trail and kept walking. The woods got darker ahead, and the air felt colder. I could hear my own breathing louder now. Every few steps, I would hear small noises around me, but whenever I turned to look, it was just the wind moving the leaves or a squirrel running up a tree. I walked for another 20 minutes before I realized how far I had come. The trail kept going down, and the trees got thicker, their trunks wider and older. The ground was wet here, and my shoes were getting muddy. I stopped and looked back the way I had come. I couldn't see the opening of the trail anymore. Everything behind me looked the same as everything in front of me. For the first time that morning, I felt a tightness in my chest. I didn't want to go back just yet, so I decided to keep going, thinking the trail might circle around and bring me back to the road from another side. After 10 more minutes of walking, I saw something ahead that made me slow down. There was a small tent set up on the side of the trail, hidden slightly behind a thick bush. It was dark green, old, and half collapsed on one side. I walked closer, feeling my heartbeat in my ears. There were empty beer cans scattered outside the tent, crushed and covered in dirt. I stood there looking at it, listening for any movement. The tent was zipped closed, but the top part was ripped open, and I could see a sleeping bag inside, twisted and empty. Something about that scene made my stomach feel heavy. It didn't look like someone was camping for fun. It looked abandoned, or like someone left it in a hurry. I looked around and saw more trash scattered behind the bush. Empty food wrappers, a broken lighter, a rusted metal mug. I didn't want to stay there long. I turned back to the trail and started walking again, this time with my head down, feeling more aware of every sound and movement. The trail was narrow here, the trees close on both sides. I could smell rot and damp wood, and the air felt colder as I walked further. My hands were shaking a little, and I tried to shove them into my pockets to keep them warm. I kept walking, hoping to find the end of the trail soon, but it just kept going. My breathing felt louder and sharper. Every few minutes I thought I heard footsteps behind me, but when I stopped to listen, there was only silence and the rustling of leaves. After walking for what felt like another hour, I started feeling dizzy. I hadn't eaten anything since the night before, and my legs felt weak. I stopped and sat down on a fallen log. My shoes and socks were soaked in mud and dew. My hoodie was damp from brushing against wet bushes. I sat there staring at the ground, feeling tired and cold. I tried to listen to the sounds around me, hoping to hear traffic or people, but there was nothing. When I got up to keep walking, I noticed something else ahead. The trail split into two paths, one going left and the other going right. There were no signs, no markings, nothing to tell me where each one went. I stood there for a long time, staring at both paths. They looked the same, narrow, dark, surrounded by trees and bushes. I felt a wave of panic rise in my chest. I didn't know which way to go. I decided to take the left path, thinking I could always come back and try the other if it led nowhere. As I walked down the left trail, I noticed it was even narrower than before. The bushes scratched against my legs, and branches hung low, brushing against my shoulders and head. My heart was beating faster now. I felt like I was going deeper and deeper into something I didn't understand. After about 15 minutes, the trail suddenly ended at a steep drop. I stood at the edge, looking down into a small ravine. The ground below was covered in rocks and fallen trees. There was no way down without climbing, and the sides were too steep. I felt my chest tighten again as I realized I had to go back and take the right path. My legs felt weak as I turned around and walked back up the trail. I was breathing hard, and my mouth felt dry. When I reached the fork again, I didn't stop this time. I turned down the right path and started walking faster. My shoes slipped on the wet dirt a few times, and I almost fell, but I didn't care. I just wanted to get out of those woods. The path felt longer than it looked. I kept walking, pushing past branches and spider webs that stuck to my face. My hands were scratched, and my knees hurt from slipping a couple of times. After what felt like another hour, I finally saw the trees start to thin out ahead. I could see light through the gaps in the branches. I walked faster, almost running now, and soon the trail opened up onto another road. It wasn't the road I had started from. This was a narrow two-lane road with no sidewalk, surrounded by trees on both sides. I stood there for a while looking left and right. I didn't recognize anything. I started walking down the road, hoping it would lead me back to somewhere familiar. My legs felt heavy, and my shoes were soaked and muddy. I could hear my own footsteps echo on the wet road. After walking for about 20 minutes, I saw a car coming from far away. I stepped off the road onto the grass and watched as it drove past without slowing down. I kept walking. My stomach hurt with hunger, and my head felt light from walking for so long without water or food. Finally, after what felt like hours, I saw a sign ahead. It was a small metal sign with the name of the highway I knew. Relief washed over me, and I kept walking towards it. Soon I reached the main road. I knew where I was now. I was about 6 miles from my house. My legs felt like they would give out, but I kept walking along the side of the highway, moving slowly, feeling the heat of the rising sun on my back. By the time I reached my neighborhood, it was almost noon. Cars were parked in driveways, kids were playing outside, and people were mowing their lawns. Everything looked so normal. I walked up to my house, my shoes caked in mud, my hoodie soaked in sweat and dew, my hair full of bits of leaves and spider webs. I stood at my front door for a while before going in. When I stepped inside, the warmth of the house felt unreal. I took off my shoes and socks and walked straight to the kitchen. My legs were shaking, and my throat felt dry and rough. I poured myself a glass of water and drank it in one go, then filled it again and drank another. I sat down on the cold kitchen floor, feeling the hard tiles press against my knees and legs. As I sat there, my body tired and shaking, I thought about the woods. The chair in the clearing, the abandoned tent, the split trail, and the endless walking with no sounds of people or cars. It all felt like a blur, but at the same time, I could still smell the damp earth in my nose and feel the cold, wet branches brushing against my skin. I didn't know why that morning felt so different, so heavy. I just knew that I never wanted to walk down that trail again. I woke up around 4:30 in the morning. I didn't need an alarm because I had been tossing and turning all night. I had a long drive ahead. The plan was to leave before sunrise, get to the construction site before anyone else, and prepare the equipment list. I worked as a site inspector for an industrial project out in the middle of nowhere. It was about a 2.5-hour drive from my apartment, with the last 40 minutes going down old service roads that barely looked like roads anymore. That morning, as I made coffee and threw on my reflective jacket, I felt this tight knot in my stomach. I tried telling myself it was just the lack of sleep. I had been running on 4 or 5 hours each night that whole week. I stepped outside into the damp, early morning darkness. It had rained a little overnight. The smell of wet dirt and concrete mixed with the cold breeze. I sat in my car for a moment, engine warming up, headlights illuminating the empty parking lot. I scrolled through my emails, mostly notices about upcoming safety trainings. Then I pulled out of the lot and started the drive. The city lights faded quickly. Within half an hour, it was just me, my headlights, and long empty roads cutting through fields. I kept looking at the dashboard clock. I wanted to get there by 7 to check the steel delivery. After about an hour and a half, I stopped at a small petrol station. It was one of those lonely buildings sitting off the road with a single flickering bulb by the ice freezer. I went inside to buy an energy drink and a sandwich. The cashier was an older man with sagging eyelids. He barely looked at me, just took my cash and handed the receipt. I remember thinking how odd it felt to see another human being, but feel completely alone at the same time. I got back in my car and continued driving. As the sun started to rise behind heavy gray clouds, I reached the turnoff onto the old service road. The first few minutes were fine. Then it turned into a single dirt lane with deep grooves from heavy machinery. Tall bushes and skinny trees lined each side. My tires kicked up mud as I drove slowly to avoid sliding into the drainage ditch. The road curved and dipped, climbed up small slopes, and cut through a few narrow clearings. There were no houses, no barns, no signs of anyone for miles. Just silent fields and scattered woods. I remember glancing at the fuel gauge, thinking I should fill up on the way back. As I kept driving, I noticed the tracks from trucks the day before. The soil was still wet, and in places it looked like thick clay. I passed an abandoned shed, its metal roof caved in. We had driven past it before, and someone said an old farmer used to keep tools in there before he died. The trees near the shed grew so close together their branches weaved into each other, making a tunnel of shadows. Finally, I reached the entrance to the site. It wasn't gated yet, just marked by 2 wooden stakes with neon tape tied around them. I turned in and drove down the gravel path that we laid last month. The place was empty as expected. No workers yet, just scattered piles of rebar, stacked concrete pipes, and bulldozers parked in the open. I parked near the temporary office trailer. The wind was picking up, blowing loose plastic and dust around the site. I grabbed my inspection forms and stepped out. It was cold, colder than I expected. I zipped up my jacket and walked across the uneven ground, checking the equipment storage first. Everything looked undisturbed. I kept walking towards the far end where we had dug test pits for soil analysis. The pits were roped off with caution tape. I walked along each one, scanning for erosion or debris that might have fallen in. The pits were about 6 feet deep. Some were narrower than others. I knelt by one, checking the markings, then stood up and stretched. My back was aching from sitting so long in the car. That's when I heard something. It wasn't a voice or an animal noise. Just a dull thud coming from the woods about 100 meters beyond the site boundary. I stood still listening. The wind rustled the trees and loose sheets of tarp flapped against metal beams. Then it came again. A single, heavy thud, like something hitting the ground. I told myself it was probably a branch falling. I shook it off and continued inspecting the pits. After finishing up near the pits, I walked back towards the office trailer. I still had about 40 minutes before the first delivery trucks were due. I decided to eat my sandwich and log the morning temperatures for the concrete pour schedule. As I sat on the metal step outside the trailer, I noticed movement along the tree line where I'd heard the sound earlier. It was hard to see clearly with the shadows between the trunks, but I could tell something was moving, weaving slowly between trees. I squinted, chewing my sandwich slower. For a moment I thought it was a deer, but it didn't move like a deer. It was lower to the ground, heavier somehow. The bushes shifted as it passed, and I could hear dry twigs snapping under its weight. The hairs on my arms stood up. I kept staring, my half-eaten sandwich resting on my knee. Whatever it was disappeared deeper into the trees. I told myself again it was probably just a wild pig. They roamed the area sometimes, looking for roots. I finished eating and went inside the trailer to write my notes. Around 7:20, I heard the rumble of diesel engines arriving at the site entrance. I stepped out, waved at the drivers, and guided them to the material laydown area. One truck was carrying rebar bundles, the other had timber forms stacked and strapped down with chains. The drivers hopped out, started unfastening their loads. The wind blew dust into my eyes, and I kept wiping my face with the back of my glove. The workers started arriving in their pickups around 7:40. The site slowly filled with engine sounds, people's boots crunching gravel, air compressors starting up. I felt that knot in my stomach loosen. Noise made things feel normal, safer somehow. The foreman, Raul, came over to check the inspection forms with me. As we stood by the trailer steps, he pointed at the woods. "You see wild pig this morning?" he asked. I nodded, surprised he noticed. "Yeah, might have been," I said. "They get close sometimes. Be careful if you walk down there alone," he said, before walking off to his crew. The morning passed like any other. Workers shouted over the noise of machines. Steel clanged, hammers beat against timber frames, backup alarms beeped as forklifts maneuvered around piles of materials. I kept walking between crews, signing off on formwork and anchor bolt placements. By lunchtime, the sun was peeking through thinning clouds, and the cold air turned warmer. Dust rose everywhere, sticking to sweat and sunscreen. Around 1 p.m., Raul asked me to check the far-end drainage trench. They had concerns about groundwater seeping in overnight. I grabbed my tape measure and survey stick and walked down past the steel piles, across the uneven ground, and along the trench edge. I crouched down, checked the water depth against the benchmark stake, and scribbled notes on my clipboard. As I was standing up, stretching my knees, I heard that dull thud again. This time it was closer. It wasn't coming from the woods, but from beyond the trench, maybe 30 meters away near the tree line. I turned my head slowly, heart thumping hard in my chest. For a moment, everything went silent. Even the wind felt like it paused. I scanned between the skinny tree trunks, focusing on the darker patches of shadow. Then I saw it. A large shape, almost on all fours, moving quickly from behind one tree to the next. It was dark brown or black, hard to tell with the lighting. My breath caught in my throat. I felt exposed, standing alone near the trench. The shape paused behind a tree. I could see its side, the curve of a rib cage rising and falling. Its back was arched higher than a pig's, more like a small cow or a large dog. But it was too silent for a dog. It didn't pant or whine. It just stood there, body rising and falling with each breath. I slowly crouched down, trying to make myself smaller. My mouth was dry, and I could feel sweat gathering under my arms despite the breeze. The shape moved again, stepping behind another tree, then another, heading away from the sight, but staying hidden within the shadows. I didn't move until I was sure it was gone. My knees felt weak as I stood up. I walked back towards the main work area, keeping my eyes on the tree line the whole time. When I reached the site office, I took a long drink from my water bottle, hands trembling slightly. I didn't tell Raul or anyone else what I saw. I wasn't even sure what to say. I just knew that I didn't want to go back near the woods for the rest of the day. Work ended around 5 p.m. The trucks and pickups started rolling out, one after another, until it was just me and the last 2 workers who were loading equipment into the storage container. The sun was dipping low, casting long shadows across the churned-up dirt. I finished my last notes, closed the trailer door, and locked it. As I walked to my car, I scanned the tree line again. It looked silent and empty, but that didn't comfort me. It felt like something was hiding, waiting for darkness. I got in my car and started the engine. The dashboard clock read 5:42 p.m. I turned around and drove down the gravel path towards the old service road. As I passed the abandoned shed, I felt my chest tighten again. The shadows inside were pitch black now. I didn't slow down. I kept my eyes on the road ahead, hands gripping the steering wheel so tight my knuckles were white. For the next 40 minutes, I drove in silence down that narrow service road. The sun set completely, leaving only a faint blue glow in the sky. The trees on both sides became black walls, their tops blending into the night sky. I kept thinking about that shape I saw breathing in the woods, the way it moved, the way it stayed silent, watching. I couldn't shake the feeling that it wasn't just an animal passing through. I never really thought about how quiet the world could feel until that morning. I had woken up just before 5, the sky still dark but with a faint silver glow starting to stretch over the tree line beyond my back porch. I couldn't sleep anymore, so I figured I'd start the day early. I grabbed my thermos, filled it with the stale coffee left in the pot from last night, and stepped outside. The air felt heavy and cool. I stood there for a moment, barefoot on the wooden planks, just listening to the quiet hum of insects and the faint breeze brushing through the pine needles above me. I had been living out there for almost 6 months by then. I rented this small weathered cabin on the edge of some privately owned forest land, about 30 miles out from town. I liked the quiet. My work as a freelance CAD draftsman only needed my laptop, electricity, and internet, and I liked not hearing neighbors yelling or cars roaring past my window all the time. There was a small dirt road that curved off the county highway and led to my place, but no one ever came down there unless they were lost. I kept to myself. That morning, as I sipped the cold coffee and felt the boards creak under my feet, I noticed the smell of the trees stronger than usual. Wet earth, old wood, moss. It had rained the day before. I thought about going down to the creek that cut through the forest about half a mile from the cabin. I hadn't been down there in about a week, and I figured the water would be rushing today. I went back inside, grabbed a pair of beat-up boots I kept by the door, pulled them on without socks, and grabbed my old hunting knife. I wasn't hunting, but ever since I saw a copperhead coiled up near the creek bank a couple months back, I always took the knife. I wasn't afraid of animals, but I didn't like surprises. The forest was dim and quiet as I started down the narrow path that led toward the creek. The ground was soaked, making the mossy patches under my boots feel slick. Branches brushed my arms. I could hear water dripping off leaves high up and falling onto other leaves below. Birds were starting to wake up, little chirps echoing from deeper in the woods. I walked slow. There was no reason to rush, and I liked paying attention to what was around me. A squirrel shot across the path, making my heart jump a little from the sudden movement. I could see mushrooms pushing out from under fallen branches. I stepped over them carefully. After about 15 minutes, I reached the top of the slope where the land dropped down to the creek. From there I could see the water. It wasn't deep, maybe knee-high at most points, but it was moving fast today, churning over smooth stones and fallen branches. I made my way down, grabbing onto saplings for balance. Once I reached the bottom, I stood there for a while just listening to it. The smell of water mixed with the smell of wet mud and plants. I noticed that the edge of the creek had eroded more since I last came. Small clumps of dirt had fallen away, exposing roots that reached out like pale claws into the air. I sat down on a rock and set my thermos next to me. The coffee tasted even worse than earlier, but I sipped it anyway, staring at the current. After a few minutes, I saw movement on the opposite bank. At first I thought it was another squirrel, but it was bigger. A raccoon maybe, or a stray dog. I squinted, trying to see through the branches. It disappeared behind a clump of brush. I didn't hear it anymore, so I figured it moved on. I sat there longer than I planned, just listening to the water and the rustle of wind in the trees. I felt relaxed in a way I hadn't felt in a while. My work had been piling up, and my sleep had been garbage lately. It felt good to just sit there. Eventually I stood up, stretched my back until it popped, and picked up the thermos. I decided to walk further along the creek before heading back. There was a spot about another quarter-mile upstream where the water pooled into a wider basin before narrowing again. The ground there was flat and clear, with large stones to sit on. It was one of my favorite places. I started walking, moving slow along the muddy bank. I had to step over roots and duck under low branches. I kept my eyes on the ground for snakes, or anything that might surprise me. After about 5 minutes, I started noticing something odd. There were footprints in the mud near the edge of the water. At first I thought they were mine from the last time I came, but they were too fresh. The rain would have washed away old ones. These were newer than the rain. They were boot prints, medium-sized, with a distinct tread pattern. I could see them clearly because the mud was soft and dark. I felt a tightness in my chest. No one ever came out here. This was private land, and the cabin was the only building within a couple miles. I crouched down to look closer. They were headed the same direction I was walking, up the creek. I looked ahead, but didn't see anyone. My ears felt hot, and my face prickled with nervous sweat. I stood there for a while, just listening. I could hear birds, insects, the creek water, but nothing else. No voices, no footsteps. I kept moving, slower now, scanning ahead and behind me. The footprints continued for a while, then veered off to the right, up the slope away from the creek. I stopped where they turned. The slope went up steeply into thicker trees. The footprints were clear all the way up until the brush blocked my view. Part of me wanted to turn back, but another part of me felt like I needed to see who was out here. It wasn't curiosity, so much as a defensive feeling. This was where I lived. If someone was trespassing, I wanted to know. I gripped the knife tighter and started up the slope, stepping where the prints had pressed into the soft earth. It was harder climbing than I expected. The ground was slick and the brush was thick. I had to grab onto branches to keep from sliding back down. As I climbed, I could see more footprints, still headed upward. My breathing got heavy, and I could feel sweat trickle down my ribs under my shirt. The smell of the dirt was strong. Wet soil, rotting leaves, green sap from broken branches. After about 50 feet, the slope leveled out. The ground here was drier, covered in pine needles and small rocks. I stood still, trying to catch my breath as quietly as possible. The forest up here felt different. Darker somehow, even though the sun was rising behind the trees. The footprints continued into the trees ahead. I followed them, moving slow and trying to keep my steps quiet on the pine needles. The prints wove between trees and around bushes for maybe 100 feet. Then I saw it. Up ahead, there was a small clearing with patches of grass and a fallen tree lying across the far side. At first I didn't see anyone, but then I noticed movement near the tree. A figure crouched down, facing away from me. They were wearing dark clothes, a jacket and pants, with a backpack beside them on the ground. My mouth felt dry. I could hear my heart thumping in my ears. I stood there frozen, watching. The person was doing something on the ground, shifting around, moving their arms. I couldn't see what they were doing. I took a slow step forward. A stick snapped under my boot. The figure froze. I didn't breathe. They turned their heads slightly, but I couldn't see their face. After a long moment, they slowly stood up. I saw something long and thin in their right hand. A small shovel or trowel. They grabbed their backpack with their left hand and slung it over their shoulder. I ducked behind a tree as they turned in my direction. I pressed my back against the rough bark, trying to breathe as quietly as possible. My chest felt tight. I listened. I could hear them moving, their boots crunching on dry pine needles. The footsteps moved away, back down the slope toward the creek. I waited, counting slowly in my head to 30. Then I leaned out and looked toward the clearing. They were gone. I stepped out from behind the tree and walked into the clearing. My legs felt weak and shaky, but I forced them to keep moving. When I reached the spot where they had been crouching, I saw a patch of freshly dug dirt about 2 feet wide. Dark brown soil piled up loosely. My mind started spinning. I looked around for a stick and used it to poke at the pile. The dirt was soft, not packed down. I scraped some away and saw a glimpse of black plastic underneath, like a trash bag. My whole body felt cold. I dropped the stick and backed away, staring at the disturbed soil. My brain felt foggy, but also sharp with panic. I didn't want to know what was in there. I didn't want to see anything else. I turned and started walking quickly back the way I came, glancing over my shoulder every few steps. My hands were shaking so bad I nearly dropped my knife. As I reached the slope, I half slid down it, grabbing at branches to keep from falling flat on my face. When I reached the creek, I didn't stop. I splashed across it, soaking my boots, and scrambled up the other bank. My chest burned, and my breath rasped in my throat. I kept looking around, expecting to see the person coming after me, but there was no one. I didn't stop until I reached my cabin. I slammed the door shut and locked it. My whole body was shaking. I could hear my heartbeat in my head. I went to the window and pulled the curtain aside just enough to see the tree line. Nothing moved. The forest looked calm and peaceful, like nothing had happened. I stood there for a long time, trying to calm down, but my mind kept replaying the image of the person crouching by the tree, the fresh dirt, the black plastic under the soil. I felt sick. I knew I should call someone. The sheriff's station was about 40 minutes away. I picked up my phone and dialed. My hand was trembling so bad I nearly dropped it twice. When the dispatcher answered, my voice sounded far away and shaky. I told them what I saw, gave them the address, described the path to the creek and up the slope. I hung up and sat on the floor by the window, staring at the trees. I felt cold sweat soaking the back of my shirt. I sat there for almost an hour until I heard the crunch of tires on gravel. I got up and opened the door. 2 deputies stood there,